Tales from the Break Room is a viewer submission podcast, and I want to hear your scariest workplace stories. So send us your story at eeriecast.com/submit. And if I narrate it on this show, I'll pay you 5 cents per word. PayPal only. Also, stay tuned after these stories for a nearly 3-hour sample of our horror fantasy novel, Drakenblood, which you can buy on Amazon right now physically and digitally. But if you want to hear the full audiobook, it's only available to EerieCast Plus members. You can sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. I know some of you have enjoyed the sample already, but when I uploaded that video, I think YouTube shadow banned it or something, because literally only about 1% of my subscribers clicked it, which is way below the norm even for my least popular episodes.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Hey, it's good to be back. You may not have noticed I was gone, because I'm smart and I schedule episodes ahead of time, but you may also notice that this episode is a little shorter than usual. That's because I was and still am recovering from a surgery. No worries, it was minor. Let's just say I'm happy with the 2 babies I have. Enjoy these tales from the break room, and I'll be working on feeling better, getting back to regular episodes, and getting back into my dead and roasted character. I don't go into attics anymore. From Neurotica Rampage. Back in 1986, I was what people would call a rambler. As a kid in my early 20s with a thirst for adventure, I found myself moving around a lot. I'd spent my whole life in a small town and was chomping at the bit to actually go out and make something of myself. I think my parents were as well. My graduation present from my dad was a sandwich wrapped in a road map, so I think he was trying to tell me something. Anyway, I'd done quite a few different jobs in the last several years. A chef at a 3-star resort? Done that. Built houses for the rich and famous out in California, which, looking back on that now, I'm pretty positive was a money laundering scheme. Finally, I was a biohazardous disposal expert for a small county down in Texas. Or in layman's terms, I shoveled up roadkill. That was the last job I held before getting the job I had when this story took place. I had just arrived down in Arizona, and through some classified ads, I landed myself a job as an apprentice electrician. Honestly, I'm shocked, no pun intended, that I even got the job, because the interview felt like a train wreck. But I think my only saving grace was they were desperate for help. There, for the first several months of the job, I wanted to quit every day. It seemed like I wasn't learning anything. None of my peers would take the time to show me, and I felt like the odd man out. I would do my best, but I think most of the crew wished the boss would have searched a bit harder for somebody with a bit more experience. Here they were, a group of seasoned electricians who had been doing it for a long time. Then you had me, a greenhorn know-nothing nomad that just blew in one day on a wind, lightly scented of alcohol. Over time, though, and with a lot, and I mean a lot of trial and error, I was finally getting to the point where I was becoming capable at the job. At least, it seemed like it to me. The day this story began was a day like any other. Well, it was a little different. I was actually having a good day, which was rare, but it did happen. We were doing a rough-in in a new suburb that was being developed on the outskirts of the city, and we were making excellent time. We'd already done all 4 home runs and ran the circuits, so I was just making up boxes at the time. And for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, a rough-in means that after the house is framed, we would come in, run wire, and nail up boxes where the outlets, switches, and lights would go. A home run is the first wire running from the breaker box to the circuit in the different sections of the house, and making up boxes just refers to prepping the wires for the next step of the process. So as I said, I was making up boxes, having a somewhat decent day when one of the journeymen came up to talk to me. "Hey man, finish up what you're doing and come with me. I guess some old woman called and wants us to come check some things out for her." "You know what those things might be?" I asked. "Not positive what it is exactly. The boss didn't say." I nodded and finished up what I was doing, then put my tools away inside my bag, which was actually a school backpack, because I couldn't afford a tool bag at the time. We then walked out to the work truck. As we drove to the customer's house, I became more disheartened. We were leaving the part of the city that had been subject to a lot of new development, and began to enter the older part of town. Oh no, please don't tell me we gotta go work on an old house. I was having such a good day. Afraid so, the journeyman said flatly, and I let out a frustrated sigh. Old houses in the area were an absolute nightmare to work on. For starters, back when a lot of them were built, it was the homeowner themselves building it, so there was likely no rhyme or reason to how it was wired. The mindset of the day was, as long as it works. If professionals had been hired, their methods could best be described as fast and loose, or sometimes even a company secret, because the codes had not been seriously enforced at the city's inception of power lines. It was the Wild West of electrical, basically. Then you actually had to get to the spot where the work was required, which usually consisted of a cellar or crawl space that had not seen the light of day for 50 years, and were infested with spiders that could pack you off, or attics which were cramped, hotter than Satan's six-pack, and likely insulated with asbestos. Oh yeah, and those spiders lived up there too. We arrived at the house mid-afternoon, parked out front, then got out, making our way towards the door. It was an old house, all right. Real old. 2 stories tall, but if I had to guess, there was a cellar and attic in there too. Lots of places to find myself lodged in. Taped to the door was a note that read, "Electricians, I can't hear very well. Just walk in and I'll be in the living room." The journeyman grabbed the note, gave 2 knocks out of courtesy or maybe habit, and opened the door. The inside of the house was dark and broken down, with an odor emanating and penetrating on top of everything else I noticed. If I had to take a guess, it was a mix of dust, cat urine, dead mice, and food that had been left out. If nothing else, my biohazardous disposal expertise had somewhat prepared me for this. But the journeyman looked a sickly shade of green, even in the dull light. In the main hall, there were stairs which led up to the 2nd floor, and several doorways shooting off into several directions. To our left, we saw what appeared to be the living room, and hesitantly, we walked inside. In the middle of the far wall was a TV playing reruns of some black and white show from the 50s. And as we peered back a little bit, we saw an old woman sitting in a wheelchair, eyes locked on the screen with an Afghan laid across her lap. She didn't even register that we were there until we were standing right next to her. The journeyman spoke up finally, in a louder voice than what he would normally use. "Miss Durham, we're here to fix your electrical."
Huh? Ah, yes. Good. It's about time. We lost power to the bathroom and spare room upstairs.
She breathed raggedly.
A rat probably chewed through a wire. I can hear the little nuisances causing a ruckus at all hours of the day. My son said we didn't need to hire anyone and he'd fix it, but I feel like if I didn't call you fellas, I wouldn't live to see it ever get done.
"We'll get it figured out for you, Miss Durham," the journeyman said.
See that you do. The electrical box is in the basement. My son isn't here, so if you have any more questions, you're gonna have to figure it out on your own until he gets back.
"We can handle it," he said assuredly. After a brief talking over the plan, we got to work. Our first goal was to isolate the circuit, find where the power stopped flowing, then hunt down all the exposed wire that related to said circuit in accessible areas, looking for damage and testing as we did. Failing that, we would start on more intrusive methods. We'd hoped to ask the son if any of the electrical had been changed at all recently, but that would have to wait until he returned. After some troubleshooting, the journeyman decided he was going to check out the basement, where we were told the breaker box was located, which left me to go take a peek in the attic. Lucky me. The house sounded like it was going to fall apart as the stairs squeaked and cracked when I ascended them. When I got to the top, I looked down the halls going left and right, inspecting the ceiling. Bingo. To the right on the ceiling at the end of the hall, there was something different. A ring was embedded into it, along with a sliding latch. I approached it and then looked around for something to open it. In a few moments of looking around, I'd found a pole with a hook on the end, standing up in the corner of a storage closet that was close by. With this, I was able to slide the latch and pull on the ring. The door swung down, and at the top was a sliding ladder. I grabbed the bottom rung with the hook and pulled, extending it down. It was pitch black up there, so I took my pack off my back, produced a flashlight, took a deep breath, and climbed the ladder. The second I climbed the ladder and reached the other side, it hit me. A god-awful smell that almost sent me gagging. I raised the collar of my shirt to act as a makeshift filter and shone the flashlight around. There were boxes stacked to the ceiling all around me, and a thick dust floated through the flashlight's beam. Above me was a light with a pull chain dangling down, but when I reached up and pulled it, nothing happened. Of course, the attic is tied to the bathroom. Why wouldn't it be? I grumbled. There was definitely something dead up here, but nothing like I'd ever smelled before. I reasoned myself to continue on, because it wasn't the first time I'd climbed into the same attic an animal had before it met its untimely demise. But this was way different than the other times. The boxes were stacked in such a way that they created a path forward, and I cautiously followed it. I kept my light on the floor to make sure I didn't trip over the stuff littered all over the place. On the other side of the boxes, the path opened up, and I stepped forward looking for any wires that I might be able to find running along the floor, or the bottom corners of the pitched roof. Taking a few more steps, I halted when my light lit up a blue tarp that had been laid over a large section of the floor. At least, the outer edges were blue anyway. Most of its center had turned a dark brown by now. It might have been my naivete that kept trying to mentally hand-wave away what was right in front of me, or maybe even the feeling that most kids have that nothing bad can ever actually happen to them. I look back at this moment and wish a lot of things had been different. But really, given where I found myself standing at that place and time, I don't think anything would have made what happened next any less horrific. As I took a step forward, towards the center of the tarp, my light still trained in the brown stain, I ran headfirst into something weighty. In surprise, I wheeled backwards and brought my light beam up. Immediately, my stomach dropped, and all the breath in my lungs dissipated. There, illuminated by the faint halo of the flashlight, hung a body. Time stood still around me as I gazed upon this nightmare, and every detail was burned into my memory. The rotting corpse hung by a rope from the rafters, its neck being gradually pulled apart by the combined weight of the flayed torso and limbs. Its clothes were missing, but the person had been so badly mutilated beyond recognition that there wasn't even a way to tell if it had been man or woman, or if they had been young or old. However, they still had shoes on. To this day, I wonder why. After what seemed like an eternity, reality finally hit me, and I started to throw up where I stood on the tarp. I felt dizzy, my world spun, but I had to get out of there. As I turned and made a few labored steps toward the hatch, I heard a noise at the far end of the attic. I spun around, shining the light at the noise, and even though my eyes had started to well up with tears, I could still make things out. In the corner was a pile of random junk with blankets lying on top. Underneath the blankets peeked a set of eyes, sunken into a small ghost-white face. The figure spoke to me, whispered to me. But in that moment, I couldn't comprehend it. It felt like I was having a mental overload, and everything sounded underwater. I started to hyperventilate, and that's when I finally couldn't hold it back anymore. I screamed. I bolted back towards the hatch, barely keeping myself upright, as I shot back through the entrance of the attic. 3 rungs down, my shaking legs failed me, and I lost my footing. Falling to the bottom, my foot got hung up in one of the rungs, putting me upside down, and I slammed hard on my shoulder. For the moment, I was stunned. But I'd entered a state of adrenaline-fueled hysteria, and I never quit screaming. Fear had overtaken me, but lying on the floor gave me a brief moment where I actually contemplated the gravity of what I'd seen. And even though a painful realization had dawned on me only in that moment, I'd already committed to my action. I had to get help. Whoever had done those things might have been there in the house with us, and I just stumbled upon their secret. When I could stand once again, I hurried down the stairs, sounding like I was going to bring the house down in the process. The journeyman came up through the basement door in a panic, yelling in confusion to me. But that just spurred me on faster, and in doing so, I almost fell down the other half of the stairs. If not for me being quick to catch the banister, I likely would have. I think at this point, I remember yelling to the journeyman that we had to get out, that we had to call the police, but I'm not sure. As I got to the bottom and was almost to the door, a middle-aged man appeared from the living room and grabbed me by my shoulders. "Whoa there, slow down, buddy, what's going on?" At that point, no one was going to stop me from getting out of this place. With all my might, I pushed him into the wall with a crash, flung open the door, and ran outside. After that, things become blurry, but I'll do my best to remember. When the journeyman caught up to me, I was pounding on the neighbor's door, begging for someone to answer, and that I needed to call the police. Most of what I said was nonsensical, but after a few moments, he got the gist of it. I could tell he couldn't really process it, though. It took some time for anyone to answer my stark raving and mad yelling, and when they finally did, we were able to use their phone. After getting a hold of dispatch, the journeyman called our boss as well. Our boss actually showed up before the police. Go figure. After what felt like forever, the cops finally showed up, and I told them my story. I finished and they marched over to Miss Durham's home, where they knocked on the door. It opened, revealing the man that had stopped me when I was trying to get out. He was apparently Miss Durham's son, and he had walked in only a few minutes before I came back downstairs. After talking with him a few moments, the cops asked if they could search the home. They told him this could easily be considered an exigent circumstance, but his cooperation would be greatly appreciated. Without hesitation, he let them in and led them into the attic. When the cops exited the house, they were yelling apologies to Miss Durham and spoke the same to her son. They then turned around to walk our way. Behind them, the son slowly closed the door, staring directly at me as he did so. The cops didn't find a single thing, nada, nothing, zilch. There was no body, no tarp. There was no pile of blankets with eyes peeking out. I pleaded with them, but they assured me their search had been thorough. After they left, I was told to hop in the boss's truck, and we then went back to the main office. I was then promptly fired. The boss told me I got off lucky, actually. The son wasn't pressing charges against me for shoving him into the wall or suing the company. And that was that. In the following months, I couldn't let go of what I saw. I ended up parking down the block from Miss Durham's house and watching them for hours, several days a week, but I never saw anything. The son, however, did catch me sitting there once, but he just waved. And after that, I didn't go back anymore. I was just going to get in trouble if I did. It's been a long time since that happened. I'm far, far away from that place now, but it never really goes away. God, how I wish it did. I know at points in this retelling of the story I've tried my best to inject a little levity, because if I didn't, I think I'd fall apart. Honestly, I didn't even want to tell it, but I've got to find a way to come to terms with it somehow, right? Those moments have taken on more clarity in hindsight, and I dream about it, causing me sometimes to wake up in the night, sometimes even crying. My wife knows about these dreams, and she does her best to console me. For the longest time, I pushed the intrusive thoughts away, but that doesn't change the reality. I was just a kid. but I was still a coward. And those dreams are always the same. The corpse still hangs there, those eyes under the blanket still stare at me, as my own tear-filled eyes come into focus and the oceans in my ears part for but a moment. And in that moment I hear a tiny voice beg, "Please help me." I'm so sorry, whoever you were. I'd give anything to help you now. Jailhouse Blues from Donut Donkey. Although I have now moved on to another branch of law enforcement, I was, for a period of time, a correctional officer in a large metropolitan prison. This was a sprawling complex, housed within huge imposing walls, wherein several thousand inmates were held at any one time. By now, the prison itself is almost 200 years old, so to say the building had a history would be putting it lightly. Given my general nature in addition to my career choices over the years, I'm certainly not someone whose mind is easily led astray by the fanciful. I'm fairly cynical about the paranormal in general, although I am Catholic, and as such I'm inclined to believe in at least certain aspects of the subject. These facts are what make what I'm about to tell you all the more uncertain to me, and why I still pause for thought upon the subject on nights that seem a little darker or quieter than others. Every so often, us officers would get a block of night shifts, 7 nights on before getting a few days of rest in order to return to our normal schedules. I'd heard stories of things going awry at night, although it was more often the inmates at fault than anything spectral. There was a majority of officers who'd always be eager to give their nights away to any other officers who were willing to take them. However, I'd worked overnights for long periods in my previous jobs, so I didn't balk when it came to my turn. We'd start at 9 p.m., and we'd enter the prison gates as usual, go through our security process and collect our keys, radios, and weapons. Then we would be locked inside until relief came in at 7 a.m. During these nights, there was a skeleton crew of around 8 officers, 2 people in the control room, and an on-site paramedic, plus a few unarmed personnel whose job it was to simply watch the various wings and keep a log of nightly activities, and to alert any officers if there was an incident of some kind. Meanwhile, the officers would keep up regular security patrols and check in on the inmates and unarmed personnel, responding when something might arise. Since the jail was so big, us officers would be assigned several wings each, to which we were the designated command for the night, and we'd be responsible for patrolling there. On the night in question, I received the prison's oldest wing, we'll call it Wing 1, filled with younger inmates, a lot of gang members, and bravado. Alongside this was a designated welcome wing for new inmates, who were adjusting to their first days behind bars, as well as the solitary confinement unit, the drug detox unit, and the healthcare wing, which housed the infirm, the injured, and the insane. The entire jail complex ran a length of just under a mile long, with a long, wide concrete corridor spanning about half of that mile, serving to join all the wings to one another. All in all, there were around 8 different units, which housed prisoners, and many, many more auxiliary units and buildings on the grounds. My patrol that night was the largest of the posted routes, but I was an experienced officer, so it was to be expected. It was a wet night in late fall. Already, the complex had been shrouded in the earlier gathered darkness when I'd pulled into the parking lot. There were huge floodlights which lit up most of the grounds and facades of the building, lending a grand but ominous air to the place, as though the great wings themselves were beasts that lay crouched and curious, awaiting my impending approach. I chatted to a few of the officers that I knew as we made our way to the control room to be assigned our patrols for the night. In between our independent patrols, we were permitted to meet up to patrol the grounds and internal perimeter walls in pairs. But we had to inform the control officer who had the master key to the one door that was accessible to the outdoor areas after dark. We made loose plans on pairs and timings. Loose because you never know what a jail at night will throw at you, as most of us knew all too well by that point. This night was no exception. By 2 a.m. we'd already had several fights, 3 self-harm incidents, an inmate leave the prison by ambulance, taking several of the patrol officers along with them as escort. The spate of incidents had ended with a regular character whom we'll refer to as Fred setting his cell on fire because his commissary privileges had been revoked. This was a common occurrence. Fred would inexplicably manage to get a hold of some contraband or damage something wired within his cell, starting an eventual but brief inferno that we'd have to put out through a designated fire lock on the door. We'd then have to drag him out of the now soaked and charred cell to find another to house him in, until he'd inevitably do it again. Fred would stand in the infernos that he created, unfazed, looking dead-eyed through the observation panel at whoever was first to respond to the alarm. If you've ever seen the "this is fine dog" meme, that was literally Fred in these instances. Cell fires were just one of Fred's many nuances when things were not going his way. He had taken smuggling razor blades to new heights. As such, he was well known to all the officers and spent his time bouncing between solitary and any wing that would house him, so long as it was an independent cell. This may sound callous to some, but I hope you'll understand when I say, while I undertook my job with great compassion for the men whose lives were in my care, including Fred to the incredulity of some of the other staff, there was only so much of these daily menageries of destruction and disaster that could truly be taken on board with a very, very large grain of salt, lest you end up losing your own sanity. So forgive me if I speak at any time in what seems like a cold manner. Think of it as a hazard of the occupation. After rehoming Fred once again and coaxing him down to a begrudging sleep for the night, myself and a female colleague, Officer Cardez, were making our way back to the respective patrols. We walked down the long, empty connective corridor, the auto-detecting lights shuddering on in unison with our progress. The lights were all housed behind thick panels of filmy, cataracted perspex and built into nooks where the walls met the ceilings, lending a sickly institutional glow to the already struggling tube lighting. The link corridor was a semi-sterile area, meaning no prisoner was allowed access without being escorted by guards. Our boots squeaked on the floors, our voices bounced off the plain beige-ish walls, and we laughed off the evening's antics, talking about football scores. All the while, beyond our noise was a familiar terse silence that enveloped that place every night. Over my years in law enforcement, I've come to terms with the well-owned blade of job-specific gut instinct, which can work so precisely at times that I could enter a wing at a seemingly normal part of any day, and I'd catch the touch of some elusive form of electricity in the air that told me something was going to go down before any semblance of break in normal routine. It was thus far proven fail-safe, always on point. As Officer Cardez and I approached the final gate in the corridor, before her turn-off to her wing, our conversation slowed. I could feel a growing tingle of something akin to the aforementioned sense, but this one felt a little different. This one had an urgency and a type of sadness to it that I'd normally associate with death, if anything. It felt dizzyingly out of place in this moment. In my peripheral vision, I saw Cardez glance at me. I knew then she felt it too. I busied myself with unlocking one of the heavy metal gates that were sporadic throughout the corridor. It squeaked open, and she stepped through behind me, closing it with a muted but stereotypical clang of slammed bars. I stepped forward, keys in hand, to lock it back, when a separate but almost identical clang echoed out from the opposite end of the corridor section we just entered. I recognized immediately it was the gates outside of Wing 1, which housed an old defunct elevator and the stairwell to the healthcare wing. I froze, and we exchanged glances. No one but myself should have been using that stairwell at the same time of night. We waited for a split second, listening to hear the telltale sign of clanking keys, a heavy-duty belt, or boots that would let us know another officer was heading our way. Yet nothing came, only ringing silence. I stepped forward to get a better view down the corridor. The end of the corridor was still swathed in darkness, meaning the lights had not detected the movement we had most certainly heard. I shouted out down the corridor, but despite the calm authority of my voice, it was quickly lost in the vast hollowness of the structure. Nonetheless, it went unanswered. There was a strange smell in the air, almost like the wild tang of sea air, and an illusion of fog that clung in the corridor. But perhaps that was simply an effect of the outdoor climate and the old faulty glass that covered the narrow slips that constituted as windows. I heard Cardez take a few tentative steps behind me before the spell of sentience was broken by a weird hushed groan or sigh from beyond the veil of blackness at the far end. It sounded odd and dislocated somehow, like a mockery of somebody in exhausted pain who'd come cruelly close to relief, only to have it ripped away. A chill ran through my mind and body, which told me it was go time. I could feel my training kicking in. I took off running down that corridor, my hand moving to my belt, where I had my radio, weapon, and flashlight. I had a vague notion of Cardez close on my trail. We sprinted until we reached a set of parallel gates, one for the stairwell in question, and another to Wing 1. I grabbed the bars of the gate leading to the stairwell and pulled on them hard. They rattled and clanged loudly, but nevertheless, they were locked securely. I heard Cardez do the same to the wing gate behind me. As I peered into the murk behind the stairwell gate, my breath caught in my throat. There I saw it. The thing I've never been able to explain to myself. At the bottom of the stairwell, in front of the doors to the old elevator, around 200 feet from where I was standing, a gray figure watched us. It sounds stupid to say, I know, but it looked like one of those mannequins that artists use to manipulate and draw different poses. It was totally and unnaturally still, but stood impassively, oddly disjointed arms sort of down by its sides, regarding us in a seemingly faux, casual fashion. It had a blank white face with the merest suggestion of facial features, but none actually discernible. Though it had no face or eyes, I could tell it was facing us, fixed on us. It was there for all of 3 seconds before I blinked and it was gone. I let out a sharp breath and said in a hushed but measured tone to Cardez, "There was somebody over there." We took 2 steps back from the bars, and I radioed control. I told them what we'd heard, and what I'd seen, and I heard the whirring of cameras as they panned the surrounding areas. They informed me they found nobody, but called for all staff to account for their locations. They did. It wasn't any of my coworkers. So we began a count and sweep. This includes a sweep of the site, and a roll check for all prisoners on the site, and a final report of that number. Cardez made her way back to her patrol area, and I began my ascent alone up the stairwell. I slowly made my way floor to floor, checking every corner, shadow, gate, and door. I wasn't frightened so much at this point. Rather, I was troubled by the very real possibility it was a security breach, and our lives or jobs were on the line. I finished my sweep of the smaller units without event. I didn't find myself disturbed and solitary, a place most avoided, even during the day, nor on the healthcare floor, where beyond the cells with the eyes and shouts of the disturbed that followed you along corridors from behind hatches, there was a subsection of old, disused treatment rooms, still with their paraphernalia and equipment sealed quietly behind locked doors. This subsection eventually joined Wing 1 and the stairwell at the 3rd floor level, where I made my way onto Wing 1 to start my count. I walked from cell door to cell door, flicking on lights and eliciting mostly angry responses from the respective occupants. Eventually, I reached a cell door that stood opposite the gate from which I had entered into the wing. One of the prisoners inside was already awake. I knew him since he worked as one of our exercise yard cleaners. Let's call him Salim. I greeted him with a good evening and tallied him off for my count. But before I could ask him to move from the doorway so I could see his cellmate, he whispered through the door, "I've seen them too, sir." I paused, my eyes fixated on his stirring cellmate. "Seen what?" I asked, in what I'd hoped was a neutral voice.
You saw something out there, didn't you, officer?
I mean, you guys are looking for someone.
I'm just saying I've seen them too. In my culture, we call them jinn. Kind of like ghosts or something. They don't come to my cell because I say my prayers. They're here because of the misery in this place.
I looked up into his eyes and he looked serious and sad. I calmly thanked him, wishing him a good night, and went about my count. Soon the roll check was finalized, and it was correct. Nobody was missing. Nobody wandering the halls, every protocol placated. I retired to my office to begin the paperwork for the various incidents that had taken place over the night, and pondered the eeriness of Salim's comments and the gray figure I could have sworn I'd seen. One thing was certain. If it was misery they wanted, this place was a smorgasbord. Almost 200 years of death, violence, frustration, hopelessness, fear, sadness, sickness, and even murder had taken place within these walls. A never-ending feast, if that is what one was hungry for. I shrugged off that morose thought and plowed through the rest of my duties until morning. At daybreak, I was finally relieved by one of my friends from Wing 4 with a large grin on his face. He was a big, jovial guy with a 1,000-volt smile. "Officer Gomez, I heard you were playing Ghostbusters with Cardes last night," he quipped. I shook my head dismissively and rolled my eyes. "Night shift is a doozy on the eyes, I guess," I answered. I handed things over to him, turning to head out the door to the locker room, thinking only of which Netflix show I'd fall asleep to after a long hot shower. I remember once when I was doing nights on this patrol, that old elevator scared the pants off me. Lit up, came all the way down by itself, it did. I stood there as it opened, flat out ready to fight. He was chuckling as he told me this. "But weren't nobody in there, man. Of course not. Thing is busted. Darn thing just resurrected for a second to mess with my rookie butt." He carried on chuckling as I walked out the doorway, musing on how the night and the mind could play such tricks. Still, I remember that gray thing whenever sleep eludes me, and I hope I never see it again. I felt like the ghost's plaything. From Penny B2203. I'm currently a custodian on a local university campus. It wasn't until after this experience I learned that the campus is ranked the 8th most haunted college campus in the nation, though I knew it could be creepy at times. I think you could find it by Google search, but I still won't mention the name of the university. Two important things should be known before I get into the story. One, my shift starts at 4 a.m., and I usually have a coworker, who I'll refer to as Jay. He was gone during this period, working a special project at one of the school's satellite locations. Two, I suffer from a heart condition, and my resting heart rate is usually 105 to 110 beats per minute, but will jump to a dangerous rate in situations of stress, anxiety, and of course, fear. My doctor has prescribed medication I can use, as needed. I only mention this because it will be important. It was day one of working alone, and I was cleaning one of the women's bathrooms. I had my headphones in, listening to some comedy to negate the creepiness of being totally alone in the building. Then I heard it. Bang, bang, bang. I took out an earbud and I listened. Soon I heard it again. Bang, bang, bang. I walked out of the bathroom and I looked around. I heard the banging again, and it sounded like it was coming from the pipes above my head. Another moment, and it seemed to come from offices to my right that I hadn't unlocked yet. Then I looked down the hallway, past a huge glass door that I hadn't yet unlocked for the day. This door led to a conference room. The room had double doors, and when I heard the banging again, those doors shook violently. I could feel my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I took a deep breath, turned around, and walked over to my supply closet. In my closet, I took my medication and sipped some water for a few minutes until I calmed down. Then I finished the woman's restroom and went on about my day without further incident. Day 2. It was an hour before any other staff were due to arrive in the building. I was walking around, checking trash bins, wiping down high-touch surfaces with disinfectant. The building had been renovated a few years ago and had a much more open layout, so I could hear a lot of sounds from the 3rd floor, especially when there were only a few people in the building. I was about to board the elevator to go to the 3rd floor, where I could empty my trash barrel. That was when I heard piano music. There is a piano on the 3rd floor just outside of our ballroom. It's used for orientation and various other events. After listening for a moment, though, I realized it wasn't really music. It sounded more like someone hitting random keys. I boarded the elevator, and I could still hear the piano until the doors opened to the 3rd floor, because then the sounds suddenly stopped. When I looked, there was no one at the piano. I also didn't see anyone running away from it. Immediately, I hit the button to go back to the 2nd floor. I parked my trash barrel once I got there and booked it to the 2nd floor entrance. Once outside, I called campus security. Of course, the guard never found anything, but just having someone else in the building with me helped to ease my panic. Day 3. This day was the worst encounter. I was sitting in an open lounge area at 5 a.m., sipping some decaf coffee. I can't have caffeine anymore, but I hoped that the warm drink would still help me wake up for the day. The lights in the building are motion sensitive and on timers, so the square area I was in stayed well illuminated because I was moving around, drinking coffee and scrolling through different things on my phone. The rest of the lights had dimmed after a few minutes of inactivity. I want to add here that when you walk into an area alone, there is an audible click as the lights turn on. So I'm sitting there alone and I hear a click. And I think maybe a staff member had come in early, and I just didn't hear the entryway doors open and shut. Then I hear another click, but no footsteps. So I looked around and I saw the lights behind me were on, but that couldn't be because there was no one there. Then another click. More lights came on, closer to me now, but still I could find no one. Then the area right outside where I was sitting illuminated with another click, and I was bathed with a wave of fear, but I stayed put, trying to control my breathing and slow my heart rate. I sat in my chair for a moment. There was a tense feeling in the air. I was terrified. Then, the chair across from me starts to scoot across the floor. It was like someone was coming over to sit near me and have a chat. But I burst from my seat and run for the exit. I exploded out onto the walkway outside the building, collapsing onto a bench, clutching my chest. I then called my boss. I took some sick time for the day. Thankfully, my coworker Jay returned the following day. I didn't tell him what I experienced while he was gone. We've heard noises together when it's just us, but believe me when I say it's easier to ignore those noises when there's someone else with you in the building. I've applied to another position in another building, though, in hopes of never having to encounter whatever this was again. The Man by the Side of the Road, from Tim 01. I work as a security guard, which means that I usually just check parking lots to see if people have parked correctly and paid for their parking. I also visit different stores to prevent stealing and to make the employees feel safe and secure. This is on the day shift. However, when I worked the late night shift, from 4 p.m. to 2:30 a.m., it was a bit different. We still checked the parking lots and did rounds at the stores, but we also did rounds at different company buildings in a city about 20 minutes away from where we usually patrolled. This particular shift was only on weekends. When I finished all the rounds in that city, and it was time to return to the office to finish my shift around 2 a.m., it was about 11 degrees Celsius and raining outside, so basically extra cold. Not many people were out. On my way back to the office, I was very tired and had a hard time focusing on driving. The road between the two cities doesn't have much around it, just a lot of woods, like a highway. After driving for about 10 minutes, I looked to the side of the road by the railings a bit ahead of me, because I thought I saw something over there. Maybe an animal or a plastic bag. But when I got closer, and my headlights shone on the railing, I saw a man sitting behind it, shielding his face with his hand due to the brightness of my headlights. He was hunched over like he was crouching. This was in the middle of nowhere, woods everywhere, the nearest house being about 10 to 15 minutes away by car. At first I thought maybe he was a drunk who'd gotten off the bus and walked the wrong way. But that meant he would have been walking in the ditch the whole way, since there wasn't much space to walk on in the road. It was also raining and cold with no streetlights on the entire stretch. I could barely react when I saw him, since I was going about 80 kilometers per hour. When I passed him, I didn't know whether to stop or keep driving. Since it was like a highway, it wasn't easy to turn around. So I kept going and got back to the office to finish my shift. In the end, there was no reason for that man to be out there like that, in the cold rain, in essentially a ditch. Maybe not the scariest experience, but definitely an odd one. The next day, I checked the news to see if anything was reported about a man at the side of the road the night before, but I didn't hear anything. If he was real, well, I hope he got home safe. This is Drakenblood, specifically the first 7 chapters read by Nature's Temper. That's just under 1/3 the full novel. Drakenblood is a horror fantasy adventure novel, which began as a Bloodborne-inspired idea by me and was written and fleshed out by a very talented ghostwriter. Drakenblood is set in a medieval fantasy kingdom called Lorne, in which a strange red rain falls suddenly. Those touched by it are transformed into ravenous monsters, while those who partook in Drakenblood, the ancient blood of dragons passed down through noble bloodlines, are twisted into far more disturbing monstrosities. 5 years later after this event, called The Bleeding, Ulrin Emberland, surviving Prince of Lorne, must survive in a dark and deadly world, his only desire to slay his transformed father, the malformed king. But a certain person from his past may prove trouble. If you'd like to hear the entire 9.5-hour audiobook and download the ebook, sign up for EerieCast Plus for less than $3 a month at eeriecast.com/plus. If you'd rather have a physical or Kindle version of the book, it will be released in October on Amazon. But the Kindle version is available for pre-order right now. Just use the link in the description. Enjoy this sample of Drakenblood.
Drakenblood, The Malformed King, by Tyler Wexland. Narrated by Scott Pye. This book is an EerieCast original novel. For more dark productions, go to eeriecast.com. Prologue. When man has slain last of its monsters, brought light to the last of the darkness, and brought safety to the furthest of lands, what then shall it become? Will it be contented with the peace it had fought so hard for? Or will it strive even further, reaching for new heights from the top of the mountains? What if it reaches too far? Will it fall back into the darkness and become the monsters long thought slain? Vangres Eberland, King of Lorne, protector of the peace, and master of the blood, was in a foul mood. Today should have been a joyous occasion. His second son, Ulrin, had just turned 15, making him a man grown. He was finally old enough to receive the gift of the blood in a ceremony that would, both physically and traditionally, legalize his royal standing. But for the first time since the founding of the kingdom, the ceremony had needed to be delayed. "I'm sure it will be resolved soon," his wife and queen, Kiana, soothed as she walked beside him. "Even if we cannot locate the originals, the maidens will send us fresh supply within the month. A short delay will do Ulrin no harm."
"Bah! Who cares about Ulrin?"
Vangris growled.
"This is about tradition and the reputation of the royal family. People are already whispering behind our backs, spreading rumors about Gerevin. What will they think when the news gets around about this?"
Kiana stepped in front of him, arms crossed. "What do you mean no one cares about Ulrin? He's your son. You love him. Would you say the same about our other children?" Their two youngest children, Tobias and Gabriella, stopped when their mother did and stood at her side. Their postures were straight, their hands were folded in front of them, their eyes were politely leveled. They were two perfectly behaved youths, a model son and daughter.
"No,"
Vangris admitted.
"You are right. I am sorry. I should not have spoken so."
The queen relaxed her stance, her expression becoming one of concern. "What has gotten you so on edge? This is not like you." He stepped closer to her and spoke low so their children would not be able to hear.
"This may go beyond a simple clerical error. The Drakenblood had already been through the final refinements for the ceremony and secured in the Chamber of Ascendance. You know that only a few can access the chamber. If it was taken intentionally—"
"You believe the Drakenblood might have been used by someone else?" she asked. "By one of your most loyal?"
"Or supposedly loyal. And if there is a risk we have a blooded enemy within our walls, then I need you all to stay safe until we are certain."
Without waiting for a reply, he stepped around his wife and continued down the hall, gesturing for his family and their escort to follow. The king's mood was not lost on their staff. While Vangris was known to be a stern and perhaps overly serious man, it had been tempered by caution and kindness. It was unheard of for him to behave so rashly and aggressively. The situation must have been dire indeed, and they kept themselves alert to the potential danger. The group ascended the steps of Worth, past the generations of portraits of the former rulers of Lorne, all having the distinctive white golden locks and cinder-red eyes of the Emberland family. At its zenith were the massive, gilded doors of the throne room. The doors were a foot thick, solid stone beneath the gold and silver embellishments, heavy enough that a dozen men could not push them open. Only a blooded member of the royal family could open the way. The king placed both hands on the door and pushed. His muscles pulsed, empowered by the Drakenblood that flowed through him. The stonework rumbled as the doors gave way. They entered the throne room, the king's escort quickly taking defensive positions on either side of the door and in front of the throne itself. It was a small group, far less than what would typically attend the royal family, and did not include any of their servants or attendants, just a small group of those that the king considered beyond suspicion, which included Landis, his minister and chief advisor, Garwell, his captain of the guard, and his hand-picked royal defenders.
"All business will be conducted out of the throne room today," he instructed Landis. "Any matter not of critical importance to the kingdom will be tabled until a further date. For those with critical matters, they may only enter one at a time, unarmed, and must keep twice the traditional distance from the throne while speaking." "Yes, Your Majesty," Landis replied, quickly jotting the king's instructions down on a slip of parchment. "I shall spread the word." "And one more thing, Landis," Vangris added as the minister turned to leave. "Send a reminder to my sons that they are expected in the throne room. Their presence is a command, not a request." "Yes, Your Majesty." With a quick bow, Landis rushed to fulfill his orders. Vangris sat on his throne and tried to wait, but impatience quickly got the better of him, and he got back up and started to pace. He was uneasy. More than that,
He was agitated and could not seem to find calm. Understandable, he thought, given the circumstances. Potential enemies everywhere. Himself, his family, his rule at risk. Who wouldn't be agitated? They would be safe here. Only one entrance to the throne room, and it could be sealed under an assault. Though perhaps it would be better to just invite their assailants in. If Gowell and the guards didn't kill them, he could show them personally the power of the royal-blooded. He'd feel better once his sons arrived, he was sure. Gervin, as heir to the throne, was already blooded. He might spend most of his days locked away, but he had the gifts of the Emberland family. Together, they could defeat any assailant, blooded or not. Ulrin still needed to be protected. He was proficient with a sword, but that would not do him much good against a blooded assassin. As his thoughts turned to how he might more quickly retrieve Ulrin, Gowell announced the arrival of the royal swordmaster, Soldan. He strutted in, all confidence and bravado, and a broad smile on that obnoxiously handsome face. Somehow he seemed oblivious to all the tension in the room. "Your Highness," Soldan said, bowing not nearly deep enough for someone of his station, in Vangris's opinion. "I have seen the bridge secured as you commanded. Quite a few unhappy faces, as you might imagine. Many nobles here for the ceremony were looking to leave now that it's been delayed."
"Nobody leaves," Vangris commanded. "I will not risk the Drakenblood leaving the castle."
"Of course, Your Highness. I understand completely. Might make things a little awkward come dinner time. Hope there's enough wine to go around. Maybe if they're all drunk, they'll forget they're prisoners." Vangris growled under his breath. He'd always tolerated the swordmaster's eccentricities and attitudes because he was so well respected, and because Ulrin had formed such a close bond with him. But his patience was thin today. He was ready to break that handsome face, then see if he had anything clever to say. No. Obnoxious as he was, at least he could be trusted. And trust was in short supply. The fool had been offered Drakenblood before, as fitting his station, and had refused. He said he didn't want to taint the pure skill required for his position by becoming reliant on supernormal strength. There would be no reason for him to steal it now.
"Have you seen Ulrin?"
Vangris asked. The prince was often at the swordmaster's heels. "A couple of hours ago. He was disappointed about his ceremony, so I gave him some drills to help him take his mind off things. He's probably still on the wall now, practicing his rapid stance swap."
"Retrieve him at once and bring him to the throne room. And, Master Soldan, keep your sword at the ready and your eyes open."
The gravity in Vangris's voice must have finally sunk in for Soldan, as his smile faded, replaced by a serious frown. "Yes, Your Highness. I'll be back soon." And with that, he took off sprinting from the throne room. Vangris put a hand on his face and closed his eyes. All of his stress was giving him a throbbing headache. It beat at the back of his eyes, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Each beat seemed to stroke his anger. When he caught who was responsible for all of this, they would suffer greatly. A hand on his shoulder startled him, and he spun rapidly, nearly striking his wife with his fist before he recognized her. She stepped back, shocked at his aggression. "Vangris, you need to take a breath. It will be okay. Sit down and try to get control of yourself." He shook his head.
"I just need some air. Stay close to the children."
Behind the throne was a massive, fearsome skull with fangs the size of a grown man. It was the remains of the last dragon to threaten Lorne, slain by the ancestors of the Emberland family. Its jaw was open and positioned as if it sought to devour the throne, while a massive spear was run through its eye socket and kept it pinned to the floor. It was meant to be a reminder to the royal family of what they had accomplished to deserve their position and what challenges they were to expect to overcome for their people. Right now, it served as a massive pain in the way of his path to the balcony. He had to walk entirely around the side of the aisle in order to step outside. He took a deep breath of the afternoon air. though it was not pleasant. It was warm, muggy, unusually so for this time of year. Combined with the crimson skies that were growing more frequent and increasingly dark, being outdoors was hardly preferable to being inside. One of those red skies loomed over the castle now, casting an eerie glow on the surroundings. The view from the balcony was an impressive one. From here, he could see over the top of the walls, past the great crevasse and the bridge that crossed it, currently drawn up over the round domes of the capital city, all the way to the fields beyond. It was a vista that usually brought Vengris a sense of comfort, of pride, of which he and his family had been entrusted. But as he looked out now at his lands, cloaked in a red shadow, he felt none of that. Instead, it was just annoyance. How much had he done for them? How much had he sacrificed? He had spent his entire life in service of his people, and yet all he ever got in return was more wants, more needs, more betrayals. The panicky fools had been sending representatives to the castle all month to seek an audience with him over the red sky, which some saw as an ill omen. The academics from the university insisted that the sky was nothing to be concerned with, just likely the result of a volcanic eruption in the neighboring country of Eerie, and should clear over time. Yet his ungrateful and uneducated citizens could not be assured. The poundings in his head grew worse. He clutched the railing with both of his hands and squeezed. The metal bent and warped from the power of his grip.
"Your Majesty,"
a nasal voice called from behind. Only Minister Landis had such a grating tone.
"You best be here to tell me you've brought me my sons," Vengris replied, without turning away from the railing.
Landis cleared his throat nervously.
"My apologies, Your Majesty. Prince Garavin is again sequestered away within his laboratory and has the door tightly sealed. I was able to pass a message within, informing him of you commanding his presence, but in his response he claimed he was respectfully declining. I would gather the locksmith, if you so desire, though he still may resist."
Vengris growled, and he pulled at the railing. With a piercing whine, the metal broke free, leaving him holding a twisted steel rod. He turned to face the minister, rage dominating his face.
"I sent you to perform a simple task, Landis," he yelled. "Were my instructions unclear, or are you just that incompetent?"
Landis sputtered. He had never been spoken to by the king this way.
"No, Your Majesty, it was simply what?"
Vengris took a menacing step towards the minister.
"Simply not doing your job? Or perhaps there is more to it than that?"
Another step.
"Perhaps you feign incompetence to hide your schemes. Perhaps you've been plotting. You are one of the few who have access to the Chamber of Ascension. Maybe you are the one who stole the Draken blood. And you're now trying to keep my family apart so your co-conspirators can eliminate us, one at a time. What? No, of course not."
Landis stepped back, his eyes wide.
"I would never. You know how the prince is. He is always in the lab. I did my best to—"
His pleas were cut off by a sickening crunch as a steel bar impacted the side of his skull. Vengris did not suppress his strength, causing Landis's head to be completely pulverized. The body wobbled on its feet for just a moment before falling off of the balcony through the fresh gap in the railing. Vengris dropped the pipe and stood there for a few moments, breathing heavily. His head still throbbed, but he felt a sense of satisfaction that dulled the pain. Finally, he had taken action against the weak lickspittles of his kingdom. No longer would he be taken advantage of by those who claimed to serve him while secretly plotting his demise. It began to rain. Strangely, the rain was crimson, like the sky. Vengris listened to it beat against the overhead roof for a minute, basking in the moment, before returning to the throne room. As he walked around the dragon skull and back toward the throne, he was surprised to see the looks he was getting from those gathered. Expressions of concern and horror?
"What is this?"
he demanded, spinning around to take in the room.
Vengris?
Kiana said, worry heavy in her voice.
Are you all right? You're covered in...
Vangris ran a hand across his face. It came back red. He hadn't noticed it at the time, but Landis had splattered his blood all across him when he died. One last act of defiance from the minister, Vangris supposed.
It's nothing,
Vangris insisted.
What do you mean, nothing? You're covered in blood!
Kiana stepped toward him, then stopped suddenly. She glanced in the direction of the balcony.
What happened to Landis? He went out there after you.
It's none of your concern. She put her hand over her mouth.
Vangris, what have you done?
Vangris roared a riotous, furious howl. The guards were stunned and looked to Gawel for guidance, but he was equally in shock. The children began to cry.
Why do you think you are to question me?
Vangris prowled towards his wife. The pain in his head beat faster and faster.
I am the king. I do what needs to be done. You have no place in telling me my business.
Gawel raised a hand, ready to command the guards to defend the queen if need be, but he became distracted as the sounds of screams began to drift into the room. A first one, quickly joined by the others, as something terrible was unfolding somewhere else in the castle. Though something terrible was unfolding here as well.
We need to get you to a physician, Vangris,
Kiana pleaded.
You are not well. I am so tired of you telling me what to do, the king shouted. You should have learned your place a long time ago. I am the king. I am the blooded. I am a god of this land, but instead of worshippers, all I have is carpers. I will tolerate it no further.
He struck out quickly, grabbing his wife by the throat with one hand and lifting her off the ground.
Vangris,
she cried in a gasping breath. With a simple squeeze of his fingers, he snapped the woman's frail neck. Her body dangled limply from his hand. She would question him no more. The queen's death snapped Gawel to action. Whatever was happening elsewhere in the castle could be no worse than what was happening here.
Get the children away from here,
he commanded as he drew his sword. The king looked at him with a fury of raging fire.
You would try to steal my children away from me. I would have expected better of you, guard captain. But I guess, in the end, you are just like all the others.
Gawel bravely stood between the king and the door as the others attempted to escort the children away. He was unsure how long he could last against a blooded, but he would stall as long as he could. Unfortunately, courage and nobility meant little in the face of true power. Vangris crossed the room in two mighty strides. Gawel cut with his blade, but Vangris caught it with one mighty hand and shattered it with his fingers. With the other, he shoved his fingers deep into the guard captain's eye sockets. As Gawel screamed, the king pulled, tearing the front of Gawel's skull and face from the rest of his head. As Gawel fell in a geyser of blood, Vangris turned towards his fleeing children. He would let no one else take them. But before he could reach them, he was stopped by a sharp pain in his back. In defiance of his duty, one of the royal defenders had come up behind Vangris when he was distracted and pierced him with his halberd. The point went straight through his back, out his chest, and dug into the floor, pinning him there. Blooded or not, Vangris should be dead, and the royal defender who had struck him gave a brief shout of victory. But Vangris refused to die. He was king. He would not be slain by a simple peon. The Draken blood within him pulsed. He felt its power and influence wash over him, and he welcomed it. Through his torso, down his legs, up his arms. There was a series of cracks as his bones rapidly broke, twisted and reformed. His body remolded itself into a new form, his true form, one no longer burdened by the frivolities of mortality. His assailant gave a startled yelp and tried to run, but not fast enough. Vangris pulled the halberd from his chest and drove the point through the back of the royal defender's skull, skewering him. The children were nearly at the door, but they wouldn't get away. He rushed after them, the dragon blood in his veins morphing him further with each step. His body became misshapen and bulbous, his jaw distended, and his mouth became home to wicked fangs. He grew in size, and by the time he reached the other end of the room, he had more than doubled his original height. The guards tried in vain to stop him, but they could no more slow him than the moon could slow the sun from rising. He left them in bloody piles on the floor, and finally reached his targets as they reached the top of the steps. He could no longer remember why he was chasing them. That part of his mind had been given up to the blood. All he knew was that he was hunting them, and that made them prey. "Father, please," the male child whispered. The words were wasted on the hunter. What care does the wolf have for the bleating of the sheep? The king took a giant breath and exhaled a plume of fire upon the children that quickly consumed them, melted their flesh, and blackened their bones until nothing remained but two tiny charred bodies. The creature that had once been Vangris let out a mighty, triumphant roar. From his back sprouted a pair of wings, flesh and bone intertwining in a pattern reminiscent of dragon scale, if only as a twisted mockery. With them, he ascended, crashing through the ceiling and finally landing on the roof of the castle. The red rain poured down upon him, and he spread himself wide to accept it. Below, screams were now filling every hall as his brethren hunted the weak. But the storm was just beginning. On that day, which would come to be known as the Bleeding, the former king would set the castle aflame, bringing an end to the royal dynasty of Lorne. As the crimson rain fell, so did the world fall with it. Chapter 1. The blood rain had ceased, for now. The creatures that had once been men retreated from the small sliver of sunlight that pierced the crimson clouds. It was as safe a time to travel as was possible these days. Olin grabbed his pack, double-checked the binding on his sword sheath, and then dared to come out of his shelter, such as it was. The warehouse had offered little in terms of comfort, and only a hard floor to sleep on, but it had been intact enough to provide suitable cover from the rain. The last thing Ulrim wanted was to have come all this way just to be done in by a wayward droplet. Oniadon was once the center of culture and history in Lorne. People used to travel from all over the kingdom, and even some of its neighbors, to take in the sights and learn about the land's past. But now the city was silent, its once remarkable feats of architecture reduced to rubble, its brilliant white domes and marble pillars covered in layers of black sludge, as if the entire city had sprouted whole out of the muck. Where the road sloped, the red liquid that had drained down just an hour before trickled away and dissolved in the sunlight, leaving behind a fresh sheen of dark filth. Ulrin carefully took the alleys that ran adjacent to the main road, whilst keeping himself hidden from any eyes that might be on the road itself. The corrupted rarely stalked outside during the daylight, but it was better to remain cautious. He had been nearly ambushed enough times to know that, with corrupted, every rule had its exceptions. It was way less than a mile between his shelter and his destination, but between his need for stealth and the roundabout path he took, the trip took him more than an hour. He was sweating heavily by the time he arrived, and needed to find a spot in the shade to catch his breath and drink water. The air always grew hot and humid around the rains, even in the dead of winter, and the thick layers Ulrin wore made him even warmer. He couldn't risk traveling any lighter, though. His padded gambeson offered him a degree of protection from blades and claws. The grey cloak covered vulnerable skin from stray crimson droplets, and the thick gloves and boots were essential for wading through the filth. Not that those justifications made it any easier when he was sweating like a turkey before feast day. He pulled a handkerchief and wiped his face, and the sound of scratching on stone caused him to freeze. It sounded like it was coming from nearby. His hand locked on his hilt, and he held his breath, waiting to be discovered by one of the creatures. The sound faded. Whatever was scraping across the stone moved away from him. It seemed he had gone unnoticed. To be safe, he waited, completely still and silent for at least 10 more minutes. Not wanting to waste any more time here than he had to, he made a break for his cover and into the street. The last stretch would always be the most dangerous, as it forced him out into the open to approach a building that stood by itself in the middle of the square. He reached the narrow staircase and ducked low to conceal himself behind the banister. He looked back to see if anything had noticed him. The street seemed clear. He needed to get inside quickly if he wanted to keep it that way. The Grand Museum of Central Lawn loomed at the top of the staircase. The stone and marble structure had managed to avoid any of the exterior damage that claimed much of the surrounding city, though its roof was covered in the same black filth. Ulrin reached the door and gave it an experimental tug. It was sealed, as he had expected. Keeping himself low, he brought out his lockpicks from the inner pocket of his coat. Back when he lived in the royal castle, he had taken to the hobby of getting into places he wasn't supposed to be, but that had been for sneaking extra snacks or escaping his math tutors. His skill in picking pockets had improved dramatically over the last few years out of necessity. It took him only a minute to turn the lock. He quickly cracked the door open, slipped silently inside, and sealed it behind him. It was pitch black inside. The prism glass windows up near the ceiling that would have distributed sunlight throughout the museum had been coated entirely on the outside. Ulrin set his pack down and pulled from it his hooded lantern. Any light risked attracting unwanted attention, but he couldn't wander blindly. At least with the lantern's cover, he had some control over the direction and intensity of the light, reducing the risk slightly. After lighting the lantern, he raised it up to illuminate the museum entry. He pulled down the hood of his cloak while slowly bringing the lantern around in an arc to take in his surroundings. Statues of the founders of Lorne flanked the entry, where a small booth still bore a sign informing visitors that the admission fee was 2 royal coppers. The walls beyond were lined with artwork, dating back to the days where the dragon still flew. Pedestals bearing artifacts of historical importance were arranged in rows along the walking paths. It appeared unlikely that the corrupted had ever made their way into the museum. They had a tendency to destroy works of art when they passed through an area. It was as if the very notions of art and history offended them, and they pursued their destruction with the same vigor with which they hunted humans. Ulrin would proceed with caution anyway, just in case. As he passed through the rows of beautifully curated relics, he wished he had paid more attention to the trip that he had taken there with his mother. Queen Kiana had been concerned that he had spent all his time playing sports or practicing his swordplay, and not enough time in his studies. She had hoped the trip would instill in him a respect and interest in the kingdom's history. Ulrin had childishly viewed it as a punishment and endeavored to sneak away from the tour whenever he could. His mother had been so disappointed with him. He felt a surge of guilt and pain remembering it. How foolish he had been. How immature. What he wouldn't give to have his mother beside him now, pointing to the various relics and lecturing him on the history they represented. He would hang on every word, and, when she finished, ask her to tell him more. But that would not happen. Fortunately, he was able to locate a sign that could point him where he needed to go, despite his lack of knowledge of the museum's layout. The Dragon's Lair exhibit was on another level, accessible from a staircase in the center of the museum. He tried not to get distracted as he made his way deeper into the museum, but as his lantern revealed plaques that gave historical context to the relics on display, Ulrin's curiosity and wistfulness forced him to stop and examine the pedestals. A stone tablet was etched with orders issued to the dragon slayers fighting on the front lines. In those days, you did not write anything on paper that you could not afford to lose due to the risk of being caught in dragon fire. Important messages were sent on stone or metal. The founding codes of law drafted upon the formal establishment of Lorne as a kingdom were written on steel in recognition of that tradition, though the last dragon had been slain by them. Ulrun wondered if they had survived the destruction of the castle. The crown of the Emberland dynasty sat underneath thick glass. It had been worn by his ancestors as the symbol of their office, with a plating forged from dragon scale as the display of the right to rule. During the Reformation, when the nobles lobbied for a greater say in the affairs of government and limiting the powers of the royal family, the crown had been removed as a show of concession to some of the demands, replaced by the sigil rings that bore the mark of the Emberland. The crown was retired to be a display piece in the museum. A broken wheel sat in place of the distinction in the path between rooms. It was all that remained of a failed project to create a great mobile war platform that could move large weapons and troops across fields assaulted by flames and arrows. It had been a disaster, too heavy to move any distance in reasonable time, particularly under fire. The entire platform had been destroyed in its first test run. The wheel had been put on display as a commemoration of the colossal failure. The Queen had spent extra time here, trying to instill the lesson that the wheel taught into the young Ulrun. Our kingdom does not hide from its mistakes. We learn from them, grow from them, and move on as a stronger and wiser people. That is why we show no shame about our missteps. We display them proudly, as it shows how far we have come. Ulrun wondered what she would have to say about the mistakes that led the kingdom to this current state. He forced himself to resist the next displays that stood between him and the central staircase. It wouldn't do him any good to become overly obsessed with what was lost. It would just drive him into another state of melancholy. He needed to maintain his drive if he was going to accomplish his goal. As he approached the staircase, his senses picked up the faint scent of smoke. Only one corrupted Ulrun had ever encountered had possessed the ability to breathe fire. Smoke usually meant one thing: survivors. There was always a strange mix of elation and concern when encountering other survivors. He might go weeks without seeing another living soul that still hung onto their humanity. Sometimes he was concerned he might be the last one left, so finding others filled him with hope and desire to hurry to them to cure his loneliness. But people could be just as dangerous as any creature. Desperate, starved, and nervous, they were just as likely to try and shank him for his boots as they were to welcome him. He'd already been forced to draw his blade on more men than he cared to think about. He took some of the soot from the lantern and ran it into his hair. The Emberland family had distinctive blonde hair, so bright it appeared white in certain illuminations. Through some unfortunate encounters, Ulrun had learned that this marked him as a target. Some of Lorne's citizenry blamed the royal family for the bleeding and were eager for any chance at revenge. To mitigate this risk, Ulrun kept his hair short and attempted to darken it with dirt and soot. Sadly, he had no similar solution for his family's red eyes. When he was ready, he lowered the hood on his lantern and silently ascended the stairs. He stopped at the midway landing and peered over the banister. The lower level had been turned into a makeshift camp. Tapestries and sacred cloths had been torn up and repurposed as crude tents. Displays and furniture had been rearranged around the center to form a barricade between the camp and the stairs. Torch sconces had been lit along the walls to light the room. About a dozen people moved about the camp, shuffling the slow amble of people with little energy and less will. One stood near the front of the camp, his eyes on the stairs, but his eyes could not pierce the darkness enough to see Ulrun hidden in the shadows. Scanning the room, Ulrun was able to spot the object he had come all this way for. In a display the survivors had left unmolested, a clay model of a dragon's head bore down on a life-sized mannequin of a dragon slayer, posed to stand in staunch defiance of the beast. It was a heroic scene, meant to be a homage to the first men to stand in defiance of the dragons and one of the prides of the exhibit. What many wouldn't know, without the benefit of a tour from a knowledgeable guide, was that the sword in the scene was the real one, not a recreation. Silverlight. According to the legends Ulrin had dug up, its steel alloy included a small amount of a strange silvery liquid that had been discovered in a fallen star. The liquid became a metal-like solid when exposed to great heat. This made materials that included some of this liquid in their making heavily flame-resistant. Its discovery, at a time when dragonfire was one of man's greatest fears, was thought to be an omen that it was time to bring the fight back to the dragons. The liquid was called glimmer steel, steel forged from the last light of a fallen star. Only enough of the glimmer steel had been retrieved to make a few items, even with caution and careful rationing of the material. Each of these items would become legendary in its own right, and the centerpiece of Lorne lore for centuries to come. In addition to its fire-resistant properties, Silverlight was said to be blessed with a blade that never dulled, was sharp enough to pierce the scales of the toughest dragons, and resilient enough to withstand the full force of a dragon's bite. It was told that it was wielded by some of the greatest dragon slayers of time, and contributed to the slaying of some of the greatest of the winged nightmares, such as Shondiores, the Black-Scaled, and Bedros, Death's companion. When researching the blade, it was hard to separate the facts from the legends. Many of the tales written about the time had been embellished over the centuries to create larger-than-life heroes and filled the histories with lessons on morality. Still, if only half of what Ulrin had read was true, it was an incredibly powerful tool, and one which would aim him immensely in his mission. If he could, he would have snuck around the camp, taken the sword, and been gone without making himself known. But the camp's barricade of furniture was positioned in such a way that there was no way to the back of the room without getting over it, which would expose him out in the open. The best he could do now was to try to be diplomatic and hope he could get them to let him take the sword without any issues. He loosened his sword in his sheath in case diplomacy failed. The next step he took with no attempts at stealth, instead ensuring footsteps resounded down into the room below. He didn't want to be seen as someone sneaky who was trying to ambush or steal from them. He'd let them know he was coming and meet them on their terms. The lookout quickly snapped to attention. He grabbed the halberd that was at his side and took defensive stance. It was a nice weapon, with intricate carving along the shaft and additional flourishes along the hook to distinguish it from a commoner's weapon. Ulrin recognized it as a weapon of defenders, elite soldiers who served the nobility as bodyguards, as well as enforcers when the need arose. The way the lookout below held the weapon, it was clear that he was no defender. More likely he had salvaged it from the corpse of one. Ulrin made no judgments. You took what you needed to survive, and corpses no longer had any use for their weapons. The other camp members gathered around the barricade as Ulrin descended the last few steps, finally coming into the light of the wall sconces as he reached the floor. He attempted to maintain a neutral posture, one that was non-threatening, but that also didn't make him appear weak. His hand kept away from his sword, but lingered close enough to quickly draw it if he needed to. The lookout snarled at him.
How'd you get in here? Did you leave the door open for those creatures? Stop where you are! I swear if you take one more step closer... Jules!
An older man, nearly bald except for a dusting of grey hair and a face lined from a hard life, barked at the lookout.
That's enough. We have enough problems as it is without you picking a fight with the first stranger we've seen in months.
The one called Jose grumbled something, but he stood down. He kept the halberd in his hand, however, ready to be levelled at Ulrin again at one wrong move.
I apologize, friend,
for your rude welcome, the older man said.
It's been quite a few sleepless nights lately, and everyone's on edge. And that's the story everywhere these days,
Ulrin replied.
Everywhere there are people left to tell stories, anyway. No offense taken.
The older man nodded. He was seemingly the leader of the group, based on how the others deferred to him. They looked at him now with tired and worried expressions.
I'm Shano. Can I inquire your name, stranger?
Maxwell. the name of a friend from his old days. The name Ulrin might only cause some trouble here. Well, Maxwell, I'm pleased to see another face who's managed to survive this long. It brings hope that there may be others yet. Alas, I could be but a poor host in our current state. We're stretched thin to breaking on food and water and can offer you none. Warmth and trust are also in short supply. If you need a place to rest from your travels, you may stay on the main level as long as you need, but I urge you to be on your way as soon as possible. Brusque, to the point, but polite. Just a hint of threat behind the words. Effective for dealing with someone who might be feeling desperate and stupid, these survivors had chosen their leader well. I understand your situation. I'm not here to cause trouble or take from your limited supplies. There's a sword in that display behind you. I have traveled a long way to retrieve it. This should be of no inconvenience to you. Allow me to take the sword, and I'll be on my way. Shanna scratched at the display of a wisp on his chin as he looked back at the display Ulrin was pointing to. The narrowing of his eyes and the tightening of his lips gave away his thoughts. He had no idea there was anything of practical worth in the display, but if there was something valuable enough for someone to travel through the maddened lands in order to find it, it would be a shame to give up such an item without seeing a benefit that would aid their survival. Ulrin could read all of this on his face, and he knew he needed to persuade the elder before unreachable demands were made. Look, Ulrin began. I know trust is short, but—
Quiet, you!
Jose exclaimed, cutting Ulrin's argument short.
Why should we give you anything? Who do you think you are, coming down here uninvited, asking to take something that doesn't belong to you? You're lucky we don't tackle you, strip you down, and then send you out in the nude to face the creatures.
That's quite enough, Jose, Shano said. He looked at Ulrin with an unmistakable look of resolve, which did not bode well. It is true. We were unaware of what we had, and we were making no use of it. But it does fall into the area we have claimed for ourselves, which gives us possession of it. If it is something that can aid us with our survival, we cannot simply give it away. It won't serve you as well as it will me, Ulrin argued. Perhaps, but a weapon will serve any master that wields it. These are dangerous times, and we may yet have need for such a weapon. But I'll concede our immediate survival is more dependent on food, water, and medicine. If you can offer enough of such, I can grant you the sword in trade. This had been exactly what Ulrin had been afraid of. He held up his palms to show empty hands. I'm afraid I travel light. I can carry with me just enough to survive my journey and not an ounce more. Nor am I aware of any caches of supplies that I could direct you to. Passing through the city, all I encountered was foul water and food that had long since rotted. I have nothing to offer but my gratitude. Shanna looked disappointed. So you would take from us but give nothing in return? I only seek to take what you have no use for. Indeed, I have nothing to give, but you will have lost nothing you already had. On the contrary, you only stand to lose if you decide to get between me and my objective. He allowed the implied threat to hang in the air. The elder furrowed his brow thoughtfully, taking in the stranger, his attire, his weapon, their odds, and the risk. He was a thoughtful fellow. Ulrin had to respect him, whatever their differences. Jose, on the other hand, was hot-headed and uncontrolled.
Fuck you! You're not taking anything but a spear to the gut!
The younger man rushed at Ulrin despite a plea from the elder. His halberd was leveled to ram the tip through Ulrin's stomach. In one motion, Ulrin took one step forward, put himself in basic sword-fighting form, and drew his blade. It was an unimpressive thing, particularly when compared to the defender halberd coming at him. The gilded blade his father had commissioned just for him had shattered years ago. This sword had been taken from the corpse of a common soldier and been worn and chipped from being wielded against the corrupted. In terms of weapons, he was outmatched. In terms of skill, the difference was even greater. Jose's reckless charge left him completely open, with the additional reach of the polearm provided. With one stroke, Ulrin tripped the point of the halberd aside. With a second, he put the blade through Jose's throat. Even worn as it was, it could still penetrate the soft, exposed flesh. Jos gave a gurgled shout, dropped the halberd, and clutched his throat. There was nothing he could do to stop the deluge of blood pouring through his fingers, though. He stumbled for a moment, then fell dead in a rapidly expanding puddle of his own blood. It saddened Olren to have to kill one of the few remaining survivors that Lorne had left, though he felt no guilt. One of the most important lessons he had needed to learn to survive in this world was that if someone intended to take your life, you needed to be prepared to take theirs. There were cries and moans and shocked gasps from the gathered survivors. Some looked like they were ready to rush over the barricade and charge at Olren with whatever weapons they had at hand. Olren braced himself for the possibility that he would have to kill all of them. Shano held out his arm, putting himself between Olren and the rest of the camp. His expression had darkened. Gone was the polite elder who would negotiate with a complete stranger. This was a protector who had lost one of his own, and would do anything to save the rest. "Bring the sword!" he commanded to those behind it. Then, to Olren, "You will take it and you will leave and never return." One of the men in the camp grabbed the sword from the display and tossed it at Olren. He caught it by the handle. It was surprisingly light, given the length. "Now go!" Shano barked. "And may the dragons bite at your heels for the rest of your days." It was as powerful a curse as anyone in Lorne could give. Olren couldn't help but feel a true dragon might be a nice change of pace. At least then, the sides were clear, the objective was certain, and the fight was righteous. With what he was doing now, none of those things were certain. But it was the only mission he had, the only thing left in his life he could try to accomplish. And so, he left the museum, the eyes of the enraged, the lost, and the dead, burning into his back, and continued toward his self-assigned quest, to return to the royal castle and kill the creature that had once been his father. Chapter 2. It was hard to believe it had been 5 years since the bleeding, since the dynasty of the Emberland family came to an end and madness took the throne of Lorne. 5 years since he had lost his family, his home, and his birthright all at once. Well, 5 years, best he could figure. It was growing increasingly difficult to mark the passage of time. The hours of sunlight were growing shorter, and nights could stretch on for days unbroken. Without predictable sunrises and sunsets, Olren had to estimate daybreak and nightfall. In that time, he had developed a subconscious checklist of matters he had to see to in order to safely camp outdoors in the new world. The first was to find a spot on elevated ground with a decent view of the surrounding area. It was important for both defense, in case any creatures decided to wander close to the camp, as well as for scanning the horizon for crimson rainfall. If he could see the distinctive red curtain in the distance, he knew it would only be a matter of hours before the storm reached him. In that case, he needed to abandon his plans and find sufficient cover. Buildings and caves provided a higher risk of him encountering creatures or hostile survivors, but it was preferable to being caught in the rain and risking corruption. If the sky seemed clear, then he moved on to set up his defenses. He'd patrol the most likely paths up this camping spot and drop a scattering of coins. The gold royals no longer had any value as currency, but they were still useful as a tool. For some reason, the corrupted had a habit of picking up the coins when they noticed them and rattling them in their hands. Sometimes they would even fight one another for them. Perhaps it was a small holdover of their human memories, a fragment of themselves that remembered when the gold pieces were important to them. For Olren, the noise of jingling coins combating creatures served as a warning. He'd then set as many obstacles as he could find in the direct path of his camp to discourage and slow any hunters. Ideally, his camping spot would be naturally defensible, but it was getting hard to be picky these days. Stones, logs, brambly plants. anything he could quickly and quietly move onto the paths. He would bring a few of the larger objects closer to the camp itself, in case he needed something to take cover behind during an attack. All the while, he would be careful to cover his tracks to avoid being trailed. Once he was confident that his camp was secure, he would look over his supplies. Food and water needed to be checked for any signs of corruption, tears in their containers, or any signs of change in scent. Even a small amount of corruption would require him to toss the entire container, however devastating that would be to his diet. Better to die from starvation than become one of those things. The rest of his stores also needed to be checked as well, in case any of his clothing, medicine, or tools got any of the corrupted blood on them. They would need to be carefully cleaned to avoid them accidentally touching his bare skin. Only when these chores had been completed could he start to take his rest. A small fire could be made for cooking, but he would have to keep the flames low and put it out as soon as it was no longer needed. He'd had a proper tent once, but found that not only was it too heavy for speedy travel, but it delivered a false sense of security that allowed him to sleep too soundly, which was risky, so he abandoned it and now slept just in his bundle of furs. He'd wrap himself in the furs as he performed his final duty for the night, a check on the condition of his weapons. Tonight he had a new sword to look over. Silverlight was unlike any sword he had ever handled. Lengthwise, it was near the size of a two-handed longsword, but it weighed no more than a short sword. Its blade was so strangely thin, to the point where it had appeared frail. In the light of his lantern, he could see a silvery pattern run down the blade. It appeared to flow like liquid, collecting as droplets near the edge, though nothing dripped from the blade. Ulrun wasn't sure how he would go about checking the condition of something like this, but he was able to confirm that the blade was indeed sharp. The hilt was solid, and the sword kept together after a few practice swings. That would have to be good enough. It wouldn't be until he was forced to use it that he would be able to confirm whether the sword even came close to living up to its legend. He sure did hope so, given the amount of effort it took to retrieve it. Traversing an iodon had been dangerous, to the extent that it bordered on foolish. Then there had been the whole incident with the survivors in the museum. He hoped Shano would be able to keep the rest of his group alive, though he knew, realistically, they would all be dead when they finally ran out of food, whether from starvation or from braving the city in search of supplies. More than just justifying the execution, Ulrun desperately needed the win. It sometimes felt like these last 5 years had been a series of compounding failures for him. After the fall of the castle and being forced to flee from his father, he thought he might rally the army, the populace, to retake it. That was when he learnt that the chaos was not just around the capital, but had spread to every corner of Lorne and beyond. Then he thought he might find some castle standing, some fortress or outpost that had been sealed against the rain, with defenders who held against the corrupted. Surely, with enough men, they could forge a safe haven for survivors and use it as a base of operations to retake the land. But the story was the same everywhere he went. Every fortification and barracks he visited. Slaughter, destruction, and hordes of corrupted. It was only after he had given up completely on the hope of somehow saving Lorne that he began to pursue a more attainable goal: slaying his father. It might accomplish little in the grand scheme of things, but at least he could have some matter of vengeance. For himself and for his family. Though even with that goal, he had little progress. The creature that had been King Vangris was incredibly, terrifyingly powerful. All of those who were blooded before the bleeding had become creatures far more powerful than the corrupted, who had been turned by the rain or consumption. But even by those standards, his father was in a league of his own. Ulrun would stand no chance without an arsenal to even the odds. Silverlight marked his first success in locating something valuable to the mission, but it was not enough on its own. Unfortunately, he was fast running out of options. He took out his journal a simple leather-bound tome that had been thoroughly worn by the elements. Here he chronicled where he had been and what he had found. In the early pages he had been thorough, going into detail on the levels of destruction, the numbers of casualties he had seen, and what might still be salvaged. Oniadon wouldn't get more than city overrun, retrieved silverlight, nothing else to salvage, hostile survivors in the museum. He flipped to the bookmarked page near the front of the book. On this page, he had hurriedly scrawled a list of locations of items with supposed mythical or magical properties which might suit his cause. It was the result of his research in the library of Veldil, which he had to make a sudden escape from when he was discovered by the former librarian creatures. Most of the list were crossed off now. Some of the objects had turned out to be nothing more than historical fiction or exaggeration. Others had been looted by other survivors long before he had arrived, and their trails had already gone cold. A few were just simply not where they were supposed to be, and Ulrun did not know why. Perhaps the information in the library had been out of date. Ulrun felt little satisfaction putting his first circle next to his notes on Silverlight. He had hoped by this point to be sitting on a considerable stockpile of Lorne's most powerful relics. He looked up at his previous failures, trying to reason if there was anything he might have missed, any place that might be worth a second trip. In the town of Eerie, the church was supposed to have a vial of sacred water that could cure any injury. According to the legend he'd read, just a drop of the sacred water was enough to fully restore a dragon slayer whose body had been covered in deep burns. Whether this was true, Ulrun would never know, as the people of Eerie had expended the vial in an attempt to treat those tainted by the blood rain. The only thing Ulrun could say for sure was that they had failed, and Eerie now belonged to the corrupted. Ariosus had been the home of a legendary line of armor forgers. For generations they'd been tasked with crafting the armor for the royal defenders, the guards of the Emberland family, and the Dragon Watch, the successor organization to the Dragon Slayers, tasked with being ready should the dragons return. Their family was supposed to have a stockpile of fireproof, crush-proof armor able to withstand the piercing of a dragon's fangs. Apparently their reputation was somewhat exaggerated, as Ariosus had been filled with bodies covered in armor that had been broken. The fortress at Aerence had been tasked with watching the border with the neighboring country of Eerie. To aid in this, they were given a mystical-looking glass capable of not only seeing across great distances, but also revealing the hidden and obscured. Ulrun hoped it would make a powerful tool for scouting the royal castle. Instead, he learnt that the garrison, or those of them that had survived the bleeding, had taken the looking glass with them when they fled over the border, seeking safety in the lands beyond. They must have been sorely disappointed to learn that Eerie was in just as bad a state as Lorne. One after another, he went through the list of disappointments and failures, and found nothing worth revisiting. He knew he wouldn't, but it didn't make it any easier. Really no other choices, huh? He said to himself. Other than abandoning all of this, finding some place to hold up and waiting out the rest of my days. It was not the first time he floated the idea to himself. Each time it seemed even more reckless not to take the easy option. But where would be the fun in that? No, he could not give up now. He had to keep moving forward, even if the path took him directly into the heart of the demon, as it seemed it would. There was only one place left on this list that he hadn't checked yet. The Temple of the Blood Maidens. He'd never been there himself. It was forbidden for any but the maidens themselves to enter the temple, even royalty. He had heard some strange rumors about the kind of dark rituals that took place there, though, and it was not a place he would have wanted to visit if he was given any other choice. But it wasn't the temple itself that he was afraid of. It was the approach to it. The temple was deep within the Aspia Stretch, a territory Ulrun knew was swarming with the corrupted. To make matters worse, The temple itself was located on an islet in the middle of the Lucent Run, a fast-flowing river filled with sudden drops and rapids that made crossing by boat impossible. The only way onto the islet was via the Maiden's Path, a footbridge that ran high over the river. A bridge that, as represented in the art Ulrin had seen, had no guardrails, no covering, and a path only wide enough for a single person at a time. In an area so rich with corrupted, being exposed in the open and left with no room to flee felt tantamount to suicide. But if he could get to the temple, he might not only find some powerful tools to use against the corrupted and his father, but also some of his answers he was looking for. The Blood Maidens were the only ones who truly knew the secrets of the Drakenblood. If anyone could tell them about the roots of the bleeding, it was them. Perhaps even a way to stop everything. He tried not to get his hopes up. There had been too many disappointments already. Plus, he still had to survive the journey. His mind made up, he put out his lantern, said his prayers to anyone who was still listening, and then tried to rest for the journey ahead. Ulrin awoke suddenly with a start. His hand went to his sword at his side, and he leaped out of his furs and into a ready stance. Adrenaline pumping through him quickly cleared his grogginess and sharpened his senses. It was dark still, and even as honed as his night vision had become, he could barely see beyond the perimeter of the camp. He tried to steady his breathing as he tried to figure out what his subconsciousness had sensed that forced him to be awake. Nothing immediately stood out to him. The camp was empty. The wind was still, and the surroundings were silent. Just as he was beginning to think it must have been the passing of some wild animal, he began to hear it. It was a low clacking sound, like someone gently tapping two sticks together. It came in short bursts, a few seconds of rapid clacking, followed by silence. The blind. A type of corrupted, one of the wandering verities who hunted in the wilderness. As the name implied, they could not see, at least not in the typical sense. They navigated and stalked their prey using the sounds they emitted. Ulrin dared to bend over and ignite his lantern. The light would not aid the blind, but it would help him. Hopefully the creature was not in a pack with another type of corrupted, in which case Ulrin would have just made himself a target. He listened closely to the clacking as it got closer. There was only ever one set, leading him to believe that this was a lone creature. Not that he could relax. Even alone, a corrupted was very dangerous. But it could also be his opportunity to test his new blade. He took a spot at the edge of the camp, opposite the direction the creature was coming from, held Silverlight up near his chest, and waited, remaining as still as his body would allow. A few moments later, it appeared. The blind was still mostly human in form. This particular one had clearly been a young man. Its greasy black hair fell in clumps around its face. What remained of its clothing was so soiled that it was impossible to tell its original design. Its face was swollen beyond recognition, resulting in its eyes being completely swollen shut. On the right side of its face, the flesh protruded to form a disproportionately large ear. At the end of its hands, its fingers twisted into long, brutally sharp claws. It stepped into the camp and opened its mouth, giving off another short burst of its strange clacking sound. Ulrin remained completely still, not even daring to breathe. The creature slowly crept further into the camp, bobbing its head about to listen for movement. Still holding his breath, Ulrin began to creep forward towards it. He was careful to remain on the opposite side of its ear. If it heard him, it would rush him with inhuman speed and try to slash him open with its claws. Without his gambeson on, his flesh would tear quite easily. He got within a single pace of the sword's reach when the blind suddenly turned towards him and let out a shriek. With a curse, Ulrin quickly lunged and slashed out with his blade. Silverlight cut through the blind as easily as it could cut through the air. The corrupted had skin as tough as leather, sometimes as hard to pierce as the strongest plate armor. Ulrin had broken a number of blades and cudgels in his battles with them. He was so surprised that his strike didn't meet any noticeable resistance that he overextended himself and nearly went tumbling down directly atop the creature. He was able to right himself just in time to avoid being splattered by the spray of blood from the gaping wound across the blind's chest. Ulrin retreated backwards, and the creature lashed out, letting out a roar of pain and rage, but already it was weakening, slowing. It stumbled forward, toward him, but did not have the strength to keep up. With one last cry, it fell, its sickly blood pouring into the dirt. He waited a minute to see if the noise had attracted other creatures. When things remained silent, he finally allowed himself to take a deep breath of relief. Silver light gleamed in the glow of the lantern. It was clean, with no sign of the dark blood that should have been covering it. It was as if the silver river that ran through it washed away the corruption. Ulrin was amazed at its effectiveness. It seemed that not all legends were exaggerations. He felt a surge of pride for having finally recovered something so powerful. Maybe his mission had a chance after all. But first, he had to cross the river. He no longer felt the camp was safe. Not that he would likely be able to get back to sleep after this encounter. Might as well get an early start on the next leg of his journey. Within minutes, his camp, such as it was packed, and Ulrin was off to the Temple of the Blood Maidens. Chapter 3. A bit of good fortune finally came to Ulrin as he reached the region of the Aspia Stretch. An entire day of true daylight without a red cloud in sight. He decided to make the most of it, choosing to brave a path that took him directly through the heart of the valley, rather than the safer route around the outskirts. It saved him days of potential travel time, and he was able to reach the edge of the river as night fell. Unfortunately, his good luck ended there. He had hoped to wait until the next daylight to approach and cross the bridge, but for the next 3 days there wasn't a single ray of sunshine. Every day he delayed, he risked an encounter of the corrupted. The roar of the river provided him with some cover from the hunters, but it also made it hard for him to hear any of the creatures approaching. He'd already had a few close calls and had lost a good portion of his supplies when he had to make a sudden escape from his camp due to a group of crawlers stumbling upon it while he was making his preparations. Now he was low on food, operating on nearly no sleep, and one misstep from running into a horde of the bastards. He couldn't hold out any longer. He'd have to risk the bridge in the darkness. Hopefully it was clear on the islet, and the temple had stocks that he could use to replenish his supplies. It was only a short walk downriver from his latest camp to the foot of the Maiden's Path. The bridge was every bit as terrifying as the artwork made it out to be. A set of narrow steps led up the walkway, which was elevated 20 feet over the surging river. Deep cracks ran through the stonework, and the whole thing looked like it could collapse at any moment. The far end of the bridge was outside the range of his lantern, but he estimated it was 500 feet to the islet. He'd be completely exposed whilst up there, and given the state of the bridge, how narrow the walkway was, and the lack of railings, he would have to go slow and carefully. It was a lot of time for something to go wrong. But if he lingered too long, it was a guarantee that some creature would be drawn to his lantern light. He took a deep breath, steeled his courage, and ascended the steps to the walkway. The walkway seemed clear, and the only sound he could hear was the sound of the roaring river below. Despite that, some part of his survival instinct was tingling at the back of his head. He drew Silverlight in one hand and held the lantern out with the other as he took his first steps onto the path. Years of crimson rain had left a slippery layer of black sludge across the walkway. With each step, he had to be careful with his footing to avoid sliding right off the bridge. The wind picked up and he had to brace himself to keep his footing. I should have done more of Master Soldan's footwork exercises, The swordmaster had always chided him for putting too much focus on his strikes and parries, and not enough in his maneuvering. A sword fight is lost and won in the feet. A casual observer's eyes may be drawn to the clash of blades, but a master's gaze watches the steps. Control your balance, spacing, and strides, and you'll control the contest. For practice, Soldan used to have Olren walk across narrow beams whilst avoiding strikes to his feet. Olren had always hated it. He loved the feel of the sword in his hands and the thrill of a duel, but the balance exercises had been dull and painful. He was glad for them now as he began to adjust his footing after a loose part of the stonework crumbled under his weight, sending a few bits of rock down into the river. I need to start bringing a broom with me, he decided as his feet struggled to find purchase in the muck. Sweep the shit out of the way. That's what the world needs. Not a good swordsman, but a great janitor. The lantern swung back and forth as he swung his arms to correct his balance. It was difficult to keep it pointed straight in front of him. Maybe if he sheathed the sword, but something told him he needed to have it ready. He reached the halfway point, the lantern light finally catching the end of the bridge and the edge of the islet. There was nothing between him and the end, and he began to hope that his feelings of danger had been the product of nerves. Then he heard the scratches. It was faint, barely audible over the rush of the river, but that sound of claw digging into stone was one that he was highly attuned to. It was coming from below him, or beside him, or behind him, perhaps all three. He attempted to quicken his pace. If he got to the islet, at least he would have solid ground to fight on. The scratching sounds followed him. It was clear now that he was dealing with more than one creature, though he had no idea how many. The unseen creatures could be heard underneath the bridge, scrambling along its sides. They were stalking him, waiting for their moment to strike. Almost to the end, hearing himself surrounded on all sides, Olren pushed for the last bit of speed to reach the descending stairs. As he did, his back foot slid, causing him to stumble and nearly lose his grip on the lantern. This was the moment the hunters had been waiting for. In one bound, a crawler leaped from the side of the bridge and directly in front of Olren, its claws already outstretched for a strike. Olren was barely able to step back in time to avoid being split open. The crawler's body had been twisted to resemble that of a fleshy spider. It had become hunched and bulbous. Bony protrusions jutted out from the torso to form extra limbs. Each of these limbs ended in a hooked claw that it could use to dig into surfaces to cling to sheer walls, or to tear apart its prey. It gave a hissing cry as it swung another of its claws at Olren. He raised Silverlight with the intention to parry the claw, which he knew would be as tough as the finest steel. But as the claw made contact with the blade, Silverlight effortlessly sank into the bone, resulting in the claw being severed from the creature's limb. It shrieked and flailed its wounded limb in the air. Olren used the opportunity to plunge the Silverlight into its head, splitting its skull neatly in two. The body wobbled and then fell from the bridge. Olren didn't have time to celebrate his victory. From behind him, he heard another of the creatures crawl onto the walkway. More scratching sounds, others climbing up from the sides. No way to fight them all here. He rushed forward toward the end of the bridge, just in time to feel a claw scrape against his back. The gambeson protected him from the worst of the blow, though he felt the sting as his skin was scratched. The creature crawled after him. Olren could hear it, close on his heels. Its claws dug into the stone, ensuring it did not have the same trouble with balancing on the muck as Olren did. He could not afford to slow, taking the path at a full sprint and hoping his feet would find the balance for him. Only a quarter of the bridge's length remained when he felt a sharp pain in his leg that caused him to stumble. One of the creatures had reached up from the side of the bridge and sunk a claw into Olren's lower leg just below the knee. The shock and pain forced Olren to stumble, and in that moment, he was grabbed from behind by the creature chasing him. It wrapped the twisted remnants of its human fingers around the back of Olren's cloak and tugged, pulling him backwards. Olren ducked just in time to avoid being lobotomized by a cleave of the crawler's claw. He tried to turn to face his assailant, but it still had a firm grip on his cloak, and he ended up getting tangled up in it, pinning his sword onto his side. The creature pulled him closer, and, Left with no other options, Olrin smashed his lantern onto it. The lantern shattered, spreading fire and oil across the creature's face. It shrieked and released Olrin to paw at its burning face. Freed, Olrin turned only to find himself facing the crawler that had cut his leg. His blood still dripped from its claw. It lunged at him, every one of its bony hooks stretched out for an attack. Now more familiar with Silverlight's capability, Olrin chose to meet each slash with his own. One strike after another, he severed the creature's limbs off the abominable body. It cried in pain but was quickly silenced forever. But not by Olrin. The creatures had little regard for one another when the hunt was on, and another crawler could not wait for its wounded brethren to get out of its way to get to Olrin, so it crawled straight over it. Its claws dug into its fellow's torso and face, killing it, as it took its place, assailing Olrin. Olrin took a step back, trying to get the room to properly swing his sword, and his foot slid in the muck. His wounded leg buckled and prevented him from catching his balance. He fell hard on his back, the wind getting knocked from his lungs as he collapsed, followed by the sound of disturbing crack as the back of his head made contact with stone. His vision was filled with a blinding white light, which faded suddenly to be replaced with a swirling black void. He blinked and gritted his teeth, trying to force his vision to clear. It did, just in time for him to see the shape of the crawler he had set ablaze. Its hair was still smouldering, its face twisted with rage. Its claw came down at him, and he could not twist away in time. There was a slash of unbearable pain as the hook dug itself into his shoulder. It went straight through the back and into the bridge, skewering him to it. He screamed in agony, but it was drowned out by the crawler's deafening hiss of victory. It leaned in to finish Olrin with its fangs. Olrin twisted and bent his arm, despite the pain, to angle Silverlight up at it. The blade pierced easily into the creature's eye, and with a jerk forward, he was able to plunge it deeper into its brain. He twisted his head away from it, praying that his hood would protect his skin from the gushing ichor. With a roar of effort and pain, Olrin pushed the creature's body off of him, pulling its claw from the stone and his shoulder. He pushed it in front of himself as he got back to his feet, practically throwing it at the next crawler in front of him. The crawler callously tossed the body out of its way and over the side of the bridge, but Olrin used that moment to his advantage, diving forward with Silverlight and slicing down in a crescent arc. He removed the creature's head and used the momentum of the strike to push the body off the path out of his way. More scratching behind him, to the sides of him, though more of them, much more. But he was almost across. He limped towards the end with all the speed his wounded leg would allow him. Blood seeped out of the wounded shoulder despite his attempts to clutch it with his free hand. The head injury was making him dizzy, and he felt like he was going to vomit, but he forced it down. There would be time for that later if he survived. With the lantern and its flame gone, he was left in the darkness, but he could just barely make out the edge of the bridge and the start of the staircase. The sounds of his pursuers kept him from hearing the clacking ahead, nor was he able to see the blind that had been drawn by the sounds of battle until it was inches in front of him. He tried to raise his blade, but the dizziness and the wounded shoulder slowed him. The blind grabbed him by both of his arms and held him tightly. Its clawed fingers dug deep into his flesh, sending fresh waves of pain throughout him. His body reflexively opened its palms. Silverlight fell from his hand, clattered briefly on the stone, and then dropped into the river below. Behind him, the crawlers blocked off any retreat. "So this is how I die," Olwen grunted through the pain. "Just when I thought I was finally getting somewhere. Fate sure is a bitch." The creature howled in response and pulled him toward it. Its fanged mouth opened wide. Olren tried to pull back and felt the back of his foot go over the edge of the bridge. He had one last idea. If he was going to die, he might as well do so on his terms. "Hope you bastards can't swim." Olren stepped off the bridge and put all of his weight into falling backward. The blind tried to hold him up, but it slipped on the black sludge. The two of them went tumbling off of the bridge together. The creature released him as he fell, and for a brief moment, Ulrin was alone in the dark, weightless. He had tried. Nobody could say he hadn't given it his best. Now he was finally done. There was an impact and a flash of cold that chilled him to his veins. And then nothing. Chapter 4. The bells jingled with every light breeze, every shift in the branch they hung from. Their jingling was the only sound besides the rustling of leaves that broke the night. Krylus was watching from her hiding spot, slowly counting under her breath if any of the corrupted were nearby. They should be drawn by the sound of bells. At the very least, any hunter in this area should come to investigate. Enough time had passed with no sign of the creatures. It should be safe to move. She came down from the tree she was hiding in, then made an attempt to brush the dirt off her robes. The crimson robes of the Blood Maidens had long become a muddy brown, but the instinct to keep them clean still took over. The bells were carefully removed from the branch and wrapped in a soft cloth to keep them from sounding in her pack. She stored them away, then walked back to the clearing where she had left her scavenged supplies. It was an impressive haul. She had travelled up the Lucent Run and made use of the unexpected daylight to gather in a small farming town that had been left relatively untouched by other scavengers. Her rucksack was filled to the brim and was supplemented by 3 further satchels. Food, clean water, medicine for fever and infection, soap and clean clothes. It would make a big difference for the survivor camp. Perhaps it would not help them in the long run. Perhaps they were only delaying the inevitable. But if she could make a small difference now, it would have been well worth the effort. And it was an effort. She was reminded as she put on the rucksack and strapped the satchels to her waist. She had never been particularly strong, and the weight of the supplies was at the limit that she could carry, if not slightly beyond it. She hauled her burden further into the thicket, up to the rocky hill. The climb here was rough, even empty-handed. With her packs, it was a nightmare. But she would persevere for them. They were counting on her. 1 foot after the other, she ascended the hill. At one point, she had to drop to her hands and knees and climb, all the while feeling like the weight of her packs would drag her back down. But finally, she came to an opening in the rock, which housed the cave where the survivors were camped. Her relief at arriving was quickly tempered when she realized that no one seemed to be serving as a lookout. She hoped that they were all just busy inside, in need of a lesson on caution but unharmed. Or maybe they needed to leave suddenly, and they left her some indication of where they were going. But she had a bad feeling. That feeling was confirmed when she went inside. It was a slaughter. There was no sign of the creature that had done it, but had been merciless. She counted the bodies just to be sure, in the vain hope that some of them might have escaped. It was difficult, as many of the bodies had been terribly dismembered, but the conclusion she reached was that it indeed represented the entirety of the camp. She dropped to her knees. It had only been a few days since she had been here, since this place had been home to 20 survivors, including a family with children. They had been low on food. She was supposed to help them. But once again she could do nothing. That seemed to be the only constant in this world. She was useless. At least to the living. She could care for the dead. She set aside her packs for now and began gathering up the bodies and bringing them down the hill, doing her best to keep whole bodies if she could identify which limbs went with which torsos. She used as little water to wet the cloth as possible, washed their faces, and carefully cut their hair with her knife. Then she covered their bodies with leaves and other foliage. To do it properly, she would have needed to dig each an individual grave at least 4 feet deep. But she had neither the strength nor the tools to do so now. It was the best she could offer. The last of the Blood Maidens kneeled before the grave and said her prayer.
Fathers before us, and mothers who birthed us,
Ancestors above us and dragons below, observe now the passing of these noble souls, these warriors, lovers, dreamers, and doers. Though cursed with a short mortal life, they nonetheless persevere to leave their mark, and we remember their efforts, this day and the next day, till the end of days, till our blood stains the same soil.
It was customary at this point to add a verse to the prayer that was customized to the people being buried, but she knew next to nothing about them. They had not trusted her, and she did not blame them. Blood maidens had been met with suspicion and rumor even before the bleeding. People thought they worshipped dragons and sacrificed children. These things were only partly true. The group had refused to even tell her their names, so she had nothing to put on their gravestones. She settled on leaving a simple stone marker. She went back to the cave and retrieved the gathered supplies. They were too heavy for her to carry with her on the off chance that she ran into more survivors. Instead, she concealed them at the base of the hill, covering them so they should be safe from the elements and rainfall. With her knife, she carved instructions into the stone on what supplies were hidden and how to find them in the case of another group of survivors passed through the area. Hopefully, they would get more use out of them than she did. Taking with her only her pack and enough to ensure her own survival for a while, she moved on. With no target in mind, she instinctively began to backtrack toward the river. Since leaving the temple, she had wandered the kingdom, looking for ways to aid those that still lived, mostly failing. But no matter how far she went or what direction she traveled, she always inevitably returned to this region. There was no reason why. There was nothing left for her here. Not that there was anything for her anywhere. The only thing that made this place different was the memories. Here was the thicket that she had taken to hunt wild animals. Blood maidens needed to be in tune with the blood flowing through all living creatures. She was expected to track game using nothing but this sense, and if she failed to hunt anything, she would be let to go hungry. Cryolis had actually been able to find the game animals easily, as she took to the attunement quickly, but she struggled with actually killing anything. It just felt wrong to end a life. Eventually, she got hungry enough that she killed a small rabbit. It gave her nightmares for a week, though her teachers had praised her for being able to sense such a small animal. She came across the road that led from the western markers into the farmlands and eventually to the river crossing. It had been down this path that her parents had brought her here when she was a child. They had too many mouths to feed and not enough money to do it, so they made their decision to sell her to the temple. Cryolis had not blamed them. She had been happy to be useful in a way that would help her siblings. If anything, she felt a little guilty when they learned how much the temple would pay for her. She hardly thought of herself being worth nearly that much. She committed herself to her training and education to try and be worthy of the expense. There was a pond that they had used for their cleansing ceremony. Now its waters were a murky red, tainted by the blood rain, but back then they'd been crystalline. It had been an embarrassing experience for her. She had been stripped in front of the entire temple and then given nothing but a thin cloth to cover herself with as she marched the entire distance from the temple to the pond. The entire way, the maidens, her teachers, and even the temple administrators were hurling insults at her, about her body, her intelligence, her uselessness. Blood maidens needed to learn to let such things wash over them, as much of the world treated them with hostility. She was dipped in the pond, which washed away her old life, misdeeds, mistakes, and the world's perceptions of her. Once she was clean, she was given her first set of crimson robes. That was the day she went from apprentice to true blood maiden. She remembered the nods from her teachers and the welcoming from her sisters. As uncomfortable as the ritual had been, she still fondly remembered it as one of the best days of her life. At last, she came to the river. The Lucent Run, named for a myth of a courageous hero who had braved sailing down the river, rapids and all,
and survived, in order to warn the cities on the coast of encroaching dragons. The story of bravery had always made Cryolus feel cowardly, particularly since she had something of a water phobia. She remembered her first time crossing the bridge known as the Maiden's Path, how tightly she held the maidens who had guided her across. The river was calmer here than it was upstream, nearer the temple, but even here it was enough to fill her with anxiety. Beneath the fear was a darker thought, though, one that she had been experiencing with increasing frequency each time she looked out at the water, that perhaps she and the world would be better off if she tossed herself into the water, never to emerge. So many dead before her, so many dead because of her. What right did she have to continue to cling to life? She knew it was wrong to think that way. It was an abandonment of everything she stood for, of everything she had vowed when she joined the temple. It was her duty to carry on, no matter how hard it was, how futile. Cryolus was the last of the Blood Maidens, and she would not dishonor their memory by conceding her life before her time, although that did leave her at an impasse regarding what to do next. She could make another pass through the Aspia Stretch, looking for survivor camps, but it was increasingly unlikely she would find any. It had been a while since she had last checked the area around the capital. That region had been hit the hardest at the start, and the capital itself had become a living nightmare. But there were many small communities built up around its outskirts that would have shelter and supplies that survivors might use. It would be a considerable trip. As she was reflecting on her options, a glint of silver nearby caught her attention. One of the blessings of the Blood Maidens was the ability to see in the dark, which certainly came in handy during the extensive nights. Even so, it was unusual for anything to glimmer like that without any sort of reflection, no light to reflect it. Curiosity drove her closer to the river's shore than she would normally brave, and there she found the source. A strange sword that seemed to radiate a silver light. Incredibly intricate in its design, she had never seen anything like it. Next to it, a man's body had washed ashore. The sword's owner, perhaps. His cloak was caked in blood, and his skin was pale and wrinkled from the cold water. She wondered whether it was his wounds or the water that had ultimately caused his demise. Guess it didn't really matter. It seemed she had one more corpse to perform rites on today. The body shuddered, and she realized that the man was still alive. Despite very much looking like a corpse, it seemed this one's will to survive was causing him to cling on. She rushed to him and turned him on his back, holding her hands above his chest. She sensed his blood flowing through him. It was weak, barely a trickle of life still running through him. She grabbed a hold of that thread and traced it to the wounds that were still seeping his precious lifeblood. Focusing her attention there, she aided in the blood's clotting, and within seconds, the wounds no longer bled. It would not be enough. He had lost too much blood and did not have enough to sustain his heart. Again she traced the flow, finding the route to its origins deep within the man's bones, within the marrow in his core. She commanded it to produce and release blood at a rate that should have taken the body weeks. There was a crack, and the man shuddered in pain as the bones bent from the pressure. If she was not careful, she would shatter the bones completely, but the man's case was desperate. Just enough blood was produced to stabilize his blood flow, and his heart set to work distributing it through his body. Hopefully it was not too late. Permanent damage could have been done to his organs or brain if they had gone without blood for too long. It would be a while before she could tell, and the immediate issues were not yet through. The man was shaking from a mix of shock and the freezing water. He needed to be warmed, and quickly. She bent and lifted the stranger using a technique she had learned, putting his arm around her neck and grabbing him under his knees to get him up onto her shoulders. Her back still ached from the heavy packs of supplies earlier, and the man might have been just as heavy, but with care she was able to get most of the weight onto her knees. As she was about to leave, some instinct told her she needed to grab one more thing. With a sigh, she bent again, careful not to drop her burden, and was able to get just low enough to grab the odd silver sword. It seemed important and might go a long way to improving the stranger's mood when he woke up. If he woke up. With that sense of urgency instilled in her, she hurried to find a place of safety to care for the stranger. Chapter 5. The sounds of clanging steel rang out through the courtyard as the two duelists came together. Their practice swords, though dull, still had a decent heft to them and gave a satisfying ring when clashing. It was the sound much like music to Ulrin's ears, a beat more pleasant than anything played in those stuffy balls or recitals he was forced to attend, even if he was currently taking a beating. It was all he could do to parry the swordmaster's strikes as they came in rapid succession. He hoped that if he held off long enough and ceded just enough ground, he could create an opening and get a surprise hit off. But Soldan's form was flawless, and despite how fast the attacks came, there wasn't an inch of gap created. "Come on now, young prince," Soldan said lightly, not sounding even the slightest bit winded from the exertion. "You can't just stay on the defensive forever. Sword fighting is a lot like courting a woman. If you wait too long to make your move, you'll miss your chance to thrust." Eager to please, and just about out of stamina to defend anyway, Ulrin shifted his weight forward for a sudden lunge, aiming to connect with the swordmaster before he himself was struck. Soldan, instead of following through with his strike toward Ulrin's center, shifted himself mid-stroke for a horizontal cut. He smacked the back of Ulrin's hand before the sword could reach him, causing Ulrin to drop the practice blade. He then put his own to Ulrin's throat. "That was impressive, as always, young prince," Soldan said with a smile. "Your form improves every day." He lowered his sword to the ground and bowed before the prince. Ulrin shook his smarting hand. "Sure doesn't feel like it. Usually I can score at least 1 or 2 points on you. Today I didn't even get close." "Forgive my impertinence. Usually I adjust my speed and aggressiveness to provide the best possible learning opportunity." "You mean you normally hold back?" Ulrin clarified, frowning. "You could put it that way, yes, but not as an insult. I use stances to test and train very specific aspects of your form that may not receive the attention they deserve in an all-out duel." "I guess that makes enough sense." Ulrin smirked at him. "Guess I don't need to have my father execute you for the offense." "You are most kind, young prince, though I'm sure His Majesty will be saddened by the loss of the opportunity." "He'll get over it." Ulrin reached down to pick up the practice sword. "So why do you feel the need to fully commit this time?" Soldan's smile faded a little. "A touch of sentimentality, perhaps. Come this time next month, you'll be a completely different man. I'm afraid I will no longer be able to beat you in a straight duel." "You mean my 15th birthday?" "Indeed. The Drakenblood will make you stronger and faster than any mortal man, even a well-trained one such as myself." He picked up his own sword. "Not that I expect you to use that as an excuse to give up on your training. I intend to make a proper swordsman out of you, even if I have to be a bit more creative in how I teach you." Ulrin couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at Soldan's praise and respect for him. It sometimes felt like he was trying to live up to his older brother's impossible standards, and his parents, instructors, and even friends didn't expect him to succeed. After all, who could possibly be as smart, as tactful and savvy as Gerevin Emberland? Only Soldan seemed to see the potential in him. Not just as his own man, but as a talent worth cultivating. "You could become blooded too, can't you?" Ulrin asked. "I remember hearing Father mention it. All masters in royal court are entitled to the blessing." Soldan shook his head. "It is true, I was offered. I think I may be the first and only member of the court to reach the title of master and turn it down. But for me, it's a matter of principle. It is important that the art of swordsmanship remains pure. No one can claim that my speed and skill with a sword is anything other than the result of hard work and dedication to the craft." "That does sound important." Ulrin looked thoughtful. "I don't think I can get out of the ceremony, though." Soldan laughed. "I wouldn't want you to if you could, young prince. Your first responsibility is to the kingdom, and the people of Lorne have expectations about their rule. Besides, my rule does not need to be your rule. If you keep up your training, I'd say you are a prime candidate for a swordsmaster title when I retire. Ulrun was floored. You really think so? Even though I'm also a prince? Won't people think you are playing favourites with the royal family? Oh, I'm sure people will think all kinds of things, which is why your talent must do the talking. The royal family has long held a multitude of titles, some earned, some inherited. The swordmaster position will go to the best swordsman. If that is you, then I will be honoured for you to add it to your list of titles. The prince was practically jumping with excitement. He knew it was undignified of him to show such emotion, and later he would probably be lectured about the proper manner in which he was expected to conduct himself, but he just couldn't help himself. He raised his practice sword at the swordsmaster. Let's get back to practicing. One more. A familiar woman's voice cut off his enthusiasm. Oh no, you are already well past your time, Ulrun. His mother, Queen Kiana, stood at the edge of the training grounds, her arms crossed, a typical look of disappointment on her face. Soldan bowed. My apologies, Your Grace. We must have lost track of time. He gave an apologetic smile to Ulrun. Duty calls, young prince. We shall have to pick this up in your next session. Ulrun would rather remain and continue his sword practice, but he knew it would be a losing battle. With a sigh, he handed his sword over to the master and then walked over to his mother with his head low. She gave a sniff and recoiled in disgust. Gods, you smell awful. You need to get washed up for supper. Your father is expecting you. Will Gerivin be there? She hesitated. He knows he is expected. She answered non-committally. Ulrun was forced to ignore the unfairness of it all and do as he was told. He went downstairs to the baths where a group of servants scrubbed him thoroughly and sprayed him with perfumes that left him choking on the lavender scent. Then it was up to his dressing room, where another group had him dressed in multiple layers of fine silk and adorned with jewelry. He expected that most young men did not have to go through such a hassle just to have dinner with their parents. Finally, he was deemed presentable and was rushed to the dining hall. His parents were already seated, as were his younger siblings. A handful of visiting nobles were also present to have FaceTime with the king. Ulrun recognized Duke Darlin, who ruled the region close to the border and was the father of his friend, Maxwell. There was also a master of students, Jeffries, who was in charge of the university. He didn't remember the names of the others, so he'd have to try and fake it to not get in trouble. The guests rose when Ulrun entered to give him the customary bow. His father was stone-faced as ever.
Glad you can finally join us, Ulrun. Our food has been ready for some time, and our poor guests have been waiting for your arrival to be served.
He sat in his customary spot at the head of the table, dressed in his dinner host finery. Ulrun gave an apologetic bow to the table. My humble apologies. Thank you for your graciousness and your patience. Will Prince Gerivin also be joining us? Duke Darlin inquired, thankfully taking the focus off of Ulrun. Vangris was quick to respond.
I'm afraid Gerivin is working on a matter of great importance for the kingdom, and it will be keeping him late tonight. He sends his regards and promises to make up for his absence in the near future.
It was a partial truth. Nobody was really sure what Gerivin was working on in the laboratory beneath the castle. He kept it a secret from everyone, even the king. He promised it was important research for the future and safety of the kingdom. So much trust was placed in him by their parents and the royal court at large that everyone just took his word for it and assumed that he would tell them more when it was time, although their father was growing increasingly frustrated with him missing important functions. Quite understandable, Master Jeffries responded. It does the heart well to know that the future of the kingdom is in such capable hands. One of the finest students I have ever had the pleasure of administering. I look forward to seeing what his research brings us. Ulrun took his seat whilst they were discussing, and thought he might have gotten away with not having too much attention drawn to himself, when the Master of Students turned his attention to him. Prince Ulrun, have you decided on your focus study subject yet? Jeffries asked. I remember when you last toured the campus. You still seem to be quite uncertain.
The prince froze. Well, you see, he struggled out. I'm still exploring my options. But I hope to have made my decision soon. That was a safe reply, wasn't it? Apparently not as much as he'd thought.
Oh dear, that's not good at all, if I may say so, my prince,
Geoffrey said.
It's not too much longer until you'll be sent to the university to expand your education, as your brother did before you. It is of utmost importance that you pick a specialty before then. The people expect the royal family to be masters of their field.
Ulrin did not know the polite response. Fortunately, Duke Darlin came to his rescue. I believe the prince's priorities are quite straight. Don't forget, his 15th birthday is next month, and with that comes the Drakenblood ceremony. His focus should be entirely on preparing himself physically and mentally for that power and responsibility, and not for courses that are still a year away. Wouldn't you agree? Master Jeffreys reluctantly agreed, and Ulrin made a note to send some form of thanks to the Duke through his son. Vangris folded his hands in front of him. I am certain Prince Ulrin will have made his decision before the time comes. His tone made it sound more like an order than an assurance. Ulrin was saved from any further awkwardness by the arrival of the meal. The servants always put on a big presentation serving the food when they had guests, and it drew everyone's attention for a time. During the meal itself, the real business was discussed, as it was custom to wait till the king had wine in hand and food in his belly to make asks of him. There was discussion of taxes, trade agreements, and leeway for conscription quotas, all well above Ulrin's head. He was glad that Garavan was the heir to the throne. He was not sure he would be able to handle it. Ulrin spent the rest of the dinner imitating his younger siblings, being quiet and mostly focused on properly and neatly eating his meal. Once the food was done, he excused himself as soon as it would be polite to do so. His father gave him a look that suggested he was less than pleased, but allowed his son to go. What he wanted to do was go straight down to the floors beneath the castle and see his brother. Garavan rarely left the lab these days, and Ulrin grew concerned, despite assurances from his parents that his brother was capable of managing himself. They used to be so close, but Garavan had not been the same since returning from university. But before he could get down there, he was interrupted by yet another obligation. At least, this was a welcome one.
I hope you haven't forgotten that we are going to study tonight, little Ollie.
His grandmother, Oma, waited for him outside the dining hall. Of course not, Oma. I was just on my way to you, he lied. She was too wise to fall for it, and her smile plainly told.
Oh, I know. Well, since you are on your way, how about we walk to my room together?
Caught in her trap, Ulrin followed his grandmother up to her chambers at the top level of the castle. Despite her age, she showed no signs of being slowed by the multiple sets of spiral staircases she had to climb. Ulrin, on the other hand, was still exhausted from his sword training and was huffing by the time they reached the top.
Oh dear, you seem quite winded,
Oma said as they entered the room.
Are they not feeding you well enough? You're a growing boy. You need to eat lots to keep up your energy.
I'm fine, Grandmother. I just came from dinner.
Well, perhaps a snack at least.
No, really, I couldn't.
It's no trouble. It'll be just a moment.
There was no arguing with Oma. So Ulrin simply waited while she did as she pleased. Oma didn't like servants waiting on her, so she had claimed a set of small rooms that included its own kitchen, so she could prepare small meals and refreshments for herself. She returned a short while later with a platter of cookies and a cup of tea.
Now then, you get your energy back and I'll get the books.
Reading about history is just going to make me tired again, Ulrin argued.
Oh, come now. My lessons aren't that bad. Besides, it's either this or you can learn under one of those tutors your mother has chosen.
He grimaced at the thought. What I meant to say is thank you for taking the time to tutor me, Grandmother. What followed was a dull, though not unpleasant, hour of learning about Lorne's history around the time of the Reformation. Ulrin enjoyed spending time with Oma.
She was kind, funny, incredibly sharp. Most of the time, anyway. She had her spells, though, one of which she experienced as their lesson was coming to an end. He turned to her to ask for clarification on a page about the lost king, and saw her sitting there, expression confused, eyes lost. It was during these times, when she didn't know where she was or what she was doing, that her age really showed. The wrinkles on her face, the fraying of her graying hair, the loosening of her skin. She appeared so powerful most of the time, it was painful to see her seeming so frail and helpless. Fortunately, this one was short, and she came back to herself quickly, acting as she always did, as if nothing had happened and that there was nothing to worry about.
Well, I think that will do for today, Ali,
Alma said, closing the book.
It's not good to try and cram too much into one day. You'll never retain it.
Grandmother?
No, that's quite enough. We shall pick up here next week.
She gave him a wan smile.
Now I'm afraid these old bones need a rest. Be a good boy and clean up the platter before you go.
He did as he was told, feeling guilty that he could not help her more, and even more guilty that he was relieved to be free. Now he could do what he had set out to do earlier. It was getting late, so many of the castle's residents had already retired to their rooms, and a minimum of servants were still about tending their duties. But he knew he would find his brother down in the laboratory, despite the hour. Down he went to the central floor, then further down into the lower levels, and further still to the passages that ran through the rock beneath the castle itself. These tunnels led to the most secure parts of the castle, including the treasury, the Chamber of Ascension, and, of course, the laboratories. Guards were posted at every important entryway to keep unauthorized visitors from snooping about. They saluted Ulrin as he passed, whilst keeping their eyes ahead. Garavin's lab was sealed tight, as usual. Ulrin knocked at the main entrance, to no response. Frustrated, he continued knocking, increasingly louder until he was practically pounding on it. Finally, the door opened part way, just enough for him to see his brother through it. Garavin looked completely different these days. He was skinnier, leaner, and more disheveled. He had bags under his eyes, and his long, white blonde hair was dirty. It was likely he was not eating, sleeping, and grooming enough. After all, he was hardly seen out of the lab. Even his skin was growing paler from the lack of sun.
"Hi, Ulrin," he said softly. "I'm sorry, I don't really have time for a visit. I'm in the middle of a vital part of my research."
"That's what you said the last 3 times I've come to see you. It can't always be a vital part."
"It can."
Ulrin squinted, trying to get a look at the lab, but Garavin blocked the way. "I'm worried about you, Garavin. I hardly see you anymore." Garavin feigned a smile.
"You needn't worry about me. I know how to take care of myself, and I promise to spend more time with you as soon as my work is complete. In the meantime, you should really focus on your own improvement. Have you been doing well in your sword lessons with Master Solden?"
A strange thing to inquire about, Ulrin thought, but he wouldn't miss an opportunity to brag. "Yeah, he even said I'm a candidate to be the next swordmaster." His brother nodded, though he didn't seem to share Ulrin's excitement.
"That's good. Continue to work at it. And it may be best if you started carrying a sword around with you. I'm sure Father would approve of a ceremonial sheath as part of your outfit."
"Carrying a sword? Why would I need to—" He was cut off by something heavy rattling and falling over behind Garavin. The elder prince quickly glanced behind him and then back to Ulrin.
"Sorry, Ulrin. We'll talk more later. I promise."
And then the door was slammed shut and sealed once more. Ulrin spent some time standing out there, his hand on the door. He was surrounded at all times by servants, guards, and nobility, and yet he often felt lonely. Garavin was the only person who used to dispel that feeling. Now, he was just alone. Chapter 6. The dream faded away, and as the waking world returned to Ulrin, so did all his aches and pains. Given how terrible he felt, he must have taken a real beating this time. Well, at least he was warm. Weirdly warm. What was this unusual warmth touching him? He opened his eyes and was met with an unfamiliar woman whose nude body was pressed up against his. His face flushed, making him warmer than he already was. How'd he wind up in this situation? Her hazel eyes met his.
Oh, thank goodness you're awake. I was beginning to worry that you wouldn't. Why are we...
Ulrin struggled to pick which question he needed answered first. She inched away from him.
I'm sorry. You were nearly dead when I found you. Your body needed warmth, and the small fire I started did not seem to be enough. I dared not to make the fire larger for risk of drawing unwanted attention, so I used my body heat to warm yours.
His memories of his last moments before losing consciousness came back to him. The fight on the bridge, the certainty of death, falling into the river, the peace that came with finally meeting his end. Seemed that he had somehow survived yet again, for all the good and bad that came with it.
Then I owe you my thanks, Ulrin said. And my life. I promise to repay this debt however I am able. There was no need for that. I was simply doing my duty to help someone in need.
She rose and Ulrin averted his eyes from her body. He heard the rustling of clothes, and when he looked back at her, she was dressed in well-worn robes. Though the colour had faded and become obscured by dirt, there was no mistaking the crimson.
You're a blood maiden, he said, surprised. She looked down at her feet. Yes, I'm Maiden Crylus. I'm sorry if that bothers you. No, it doesn't bother me. If anything, it might be Providence. I was on my way to your temple when I was...
Well, he gestured to his injuries.
When this happened to me.
Her eyes went wide.
Why would you want to go to the temple?
Looking for answers.
Crylus shook her head. I don't think you'll find any. There's nothing left there but death.
Ulrin tried to rise, clutching the thick blanket that was the only thing covering his nudity, but a sharp pain in his chest made him stop. He must have cracked a rib during his fall. It didn't feel too serious, but he would have to be careful until he had recovered.
Well, that raises even more questions, he said, settling back down. And I'd love to ask them, but first, do you think I could get my clothes? They're drying near the fire over there. There's quite a lot of blood covering them. Some of yours, some of the ichor of the corrupted, so I washed them as best as I could. I was also going to have to sew up those nasty tears in your cloak and overcoat. I always travel with my needle just for such an occasion.
She held up the hem of her robe to show a section that had been patched. Once more he tried to rise, this time more gently and carefully, and was able to get into a seated position.
If you are so inclined, I'd appreciate it. Not wise to run around with big holes in your clothes, exposing your skin. I must have gotten pretty lucky that none of that ichor got me. I do hope you took care whilst washing and caring for me. I'd hate if your generosity caused you to make direct contact with the vile stuff. You needn't worry. My conditioning as a blood maiden has made me immune to the corruption.
That revelation nearly made Ulrin jump, but the pain in his chest stopped him.
You're serious? The rain? The ichor? It has no effect on you?
Crylus put a hand to her throat in a strange gesture akin to choking herself.
The conditioning to handle raw Draken blood, purify it for use, changes our bodies. It makes us sick in a way, deteriorates us over time. Maidens don't often live to see their 40th birthday. It also prevents us from becoming blooded ourselves. I was told that since our bodies cannot handle the Draken blood, they reject it, expel it. And, as it turned out, they also protected us from when the blood became corrupted. If I'm in the crimson rain for too long, I get nauseous for a while, but after my body has finished expelling everything, I'm fine. I heard there was dark magic involved with the Blood Maidens. I had no idea it would shorten your lives like that.
Hardly seems fair, given that those granted the Drakenblood you purify were given extended lifespans. I'm sorry. She shook her head. There's no need for you to be apologizing. It's not like you had anything to do with the process. No, but my family did, Oren thought. The Emberlin dynasty had long had demands for refined Drakenblood for the royal family and the masters who'd served them. He wondered how many people knew about the cost of making it. Did his father sanction making young women sick and letting them die young in the name of carrying on the legacy of blooded rulers? He must have. Cryolis must have misread the guilt on his face as worry, for she rushed to reassure him. Oh, but I'm not physically weaker or anything. Not at my age, anyway. That part won't come till later, and it comes with certain advantages. I can use my control over blood to treat certain wounds, for example, like I did with the lacerations on your shoulder and leg. Oren sighed. The more we talk, the deeper my debt to you seems to get. No. Like I said, I was simply doing my duty. We maidens are first and foremost servants of the people. Oren looked over to the blood maiden in front of him, this kind and demure young woman who had saved his life. She was quite different from the stories about the maidens he had heard. They had reputations as witches, cruel and manipulative. The king had called them a necessary evil, as only they could refine the Drakenblood. It had given Oren this image of old crones with crooked noses and yellowed teeth casting spells from the darkness of their temple. Not only did Cryolis act very differently, but she also looked so normal. Her features were fairly plain, not unattractive per se, but not really good-looking either. Dark hair framed her face and fell to her shoulders. If it wasn't for the crimson robes, she would not have stood out in a crowd. How many more of you are there? He asked. If they were truly immune to the corruption, and they were unlikely to turn him into a frog, then they could make powerful allies. Her gaze again found the ground. I'm the only one left. Oren's slightly boosted spirits sank back down. You said there was nothing left at the temple but death. What exactly happened? She wouldn't look at him. There was an attack. The temple should have been safe, but... She shook her head. I was the only one who escaped. The temple belongs to the corrupted now. That might explain why there are so many of them on the bridge, Oren pondered, rubbing his chin. Yes, and there are more on the islet and inside the temple. I recommend choosing a different course. He noticed she was still avoiding his gaze, as if afraid of giving something away if she looked him directly in the eye, clearly hiding something. But she hadn't given him any reason to think she was untrustworthy. He decided not to press it for now. I'll take your word for it, though I don't really have another course. I'd show you my journal, but even if my pack managed to survive my fall, I'm sure everything inside got waterlogged. The temple was my last hope for answers. What kind of answers? Tricks or tools to kill the corrupted, particularly the nasty ones, the ones who were blooded before the bleeding, such as his father. How the Drakenblood and the corruption works. If I was really feeling hopeful, maybe even find ways to prevent or stop it from continuing to happen, though I wasn't really holding my breath. She pulled at the edges of her robe. I'm sorry. I must be a disappointment not having the answers. The matrons, the leaders of our order, they might have. There were many secrets that only they were entitled to. When the bleeding happened, they started locking themselves away for long hours, working on something in secret. My sisters and I thought they might have understood what was happening and how to stop it. But they wouldn't share any details about what they knew or what they were working on. We just had to trust them. Sounds familiar, Oren thought, thinking of his brother's time in the lab. Did anything come of their work? I don't know for sure. I've always assumed they were not yet finished when... She grimaced. When the temple fell. Whatever knowledge they had died with them. Probably, though that's still a better lead than I've had in a long time. He broke into a coughing fit before he could continue. His throat was incredibly sore. Strange he hadn't noticed until now. Must have been distracted. Cryolus rushed over to him with a flask of water. Here, drink. Your body's going to need plenty of fluids to recover what was spent in your healing. He took the flask gratefully, and it wasn't until he had drained half of it that he stopped himself. Sorry, I should be more careful. I know clean water is tough to find. No, it's okay. I know where more is hidden if need be. Besides, I feel responsible for you. I used my ability to treat you without your permission, and now you're suffering the side effects. Just for future reference, any time you find me half dead, you have my full permission to use your ability to try and save my life. She smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had seen in a long time. I'll remember that. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever gotten your name. Maxwell. He lied about his name on instinct, though it felt wrong to lie to someone who'd seemed so open and genuine. What were the odds that she blamed the royal family for the bleeding, like so many others did? He was still weak and couldn't take any chances. Maxwell. She looked at him curiously. Something the matter? I just thought... No, never mind. It's nice to make your acquaintance, Maxwell. She seemed suspicious. Could she have recognized him? He didn't have access to a mirror right now, but he would bet all the dirt in his hair had gotten washed away in the river. She'd also gotten a close look at his eyes. If she recognized the signs of the royal family, she might have already identified him. In which case, he just seemed like an untrustworthy liar. But she didn't push it on him. Instead, she went to retrieve her sewing needle and Ulrin's clothes and patch up the holes from his most recent battle. Maybe it had been a figment of his imagination. How far down the river did I wind up? Ulrin asked after a period of silence. About a mile or so from the temple, I think. Not too far out from the hills bordering the stretch. Not too far a walk, then. Good. Once my clothes are ready and I've had a good chance to recover, I can make another attempt at the bridge. She lowered her needle and looked at him like he had just sprouted horns from his head. Do you seek death? I already told you that there is nobody alive besides the corrupted. You already nearly died once just on the approach. Who do you hope to find? Some of the work the matrons did might remain. It might be the only place in the world where answers about the corrupted might be found. I can't just walk away from it. He tried to sound confident. The thought of returning to the bridge filled him with dread. And if you face the same enemies once again? I was barely able to keep you alive this time. Next time... Ulrin knew all too well. Now that I'm more aware of what I'm facing, I can try to be more prepared for it. Although I'll admit that without Silverlight, my odds have likely dropped dramatically. Silverlight? My sword. He winced at the memory of dropping it from the bridge. A powerful artifact that I just recovered. I was just beginning to think my odds were improving thanks to it. So, of course, I lost it right away. Fell into the river right before I did. Probably sank to the bottom or washed out to sea. Oh, I thought it looked unique. She gestured to the other side of the fire, near where she had a pile of supplies. There, leaning up against the bark of a fallen tree, was Silverlight. It washed up just beside you. Never seen anything like it. Figured you'd miss it if you woke up without it. He was stunned. What were the odds that he and the sword would have washed up in the same place? Certainly not an impossibility, but given their differences in weight, and the time between when they fell, it was truly extraordinary. Cryolus took his speechlessness as a sign of agitation. I'm sorry for putting it out of reach. I couldn't be sure if you woke up what sort of mental state you would be in. There are far too many quickly prone to violence. No, that's quite all right. Thank you for bringing it. I thought for sure it was lost. A glimmer of hope, fleeting as it was relit within him. I may actually have a chance now. She looked over at the sword, which reflected the firelight across the silver stream that ran down it.
There are stories that tell of legendary weapons whose destinies were tied to those of their chosen bearers. When joined, they would become greater than the sum of their parts. Even if separated, they would be reunited by Providence, as if the weapon itself knew to seek its wielder. Maybe you have a similar bond with this sword.
Ulrun scratched at his chin. I'm not too sure about that. I only had the sword for a short time before nearly losing it and my life in the process, but it's nice to be given a second chance all the same. I won't waste it. Krylus nodded, then returned to her needlework.
I take it you won't be dissuaded from trying to reach the temple, particularly now that your weapon has been returned. I suppose the only proper thing for me to do in this situation, short of tying you up and trying to drag you elsewhere, is to accompany you.
What? No, it's far too dangerous.
Oh, but not too dangerous for you?
I'm choosing to take the risk.
And so am I.
She finished her needlework on the cloak's tear and held it up to examine her patchwork.
I won't hold you back. I know things about the temples that could be helpful. Entrances that will allow you to avoid the main hall where the bulk of the corrupted is likely to still gather. The way up to the matron's quarters, that's where the keys are kept.
A guide to the temple would be helpful, Ulrun admitted. Assuming we survive the bridge anyway. Well, why would you want to? You said yourself that trying to reach the temple is tantamount to suicide.
I'm just looking to do some good. If I can help you find your answers, it will have been a worthwhile risk. Besides, if you truly do have some great destiny with that fancy sword of yours, I would want to see it.
She argued, but her voice was sad, resigned. Though he barely knew her, Ulrun's heart broke for this young woman. He owed her too much to let her die, but he also had no good reason to refuse her help. Sure, it was dangerous, but so was surviving in this world. Beneath his sympathy, there was a lingering doubt about his new companion's trustworthiness. Not just because she was a blood maiden, whom he had been brought up to distrust, but she seemed very quick to offer aid and volunteer for what was likely to be a deadly excursion. Survivors these days rarely offered anything up for free. But whatever it was that she hoped to gain from Ulrun, he couldn't see it. Maybe she truly was just a kind person who wanted to help him. The last of the decent folk. He'd have to be on his guard nonetheless. Fine, Ulrun conceded. But you stay well behind me. Don't move until I've cleared a path, and if it looks like I'm going to be overrun, you retreat. I won't have you die for me.
I'll agree to your conditions, but only if you agree to mine.
She gestured to his wounded shoulder with her needle.
You wait until you are recovered before you begin this little crusade. If you try to cross the bridge in this state, I will stand between you and the creatures.
He would have argued about wasting time, but as he shifted his body, he was reminded of just how badly his aches were. You drive a hard bargain. Very well. We'll need to be careful if we intend to camp out here for a while, as this area is not safe.
I'll take care of it. You just rest for now.
His energy drained, and with it his will to argue, he lay back down. Though he still had some misgivings, he felt he could trust Krylus would not allow anything bad to happen to him whilst he rested. As he waited to be taken by the uncomfortable sleep, he repeated his encounter on the bridge in his head, plotting what he could do differently on his next attempt. As it would turn out, he needn't have bothered. Chapter 7. Ulrun recovered from his injuries faster than he expected. A lingering effect of the power the Blood Maiden had used to save his life, he was told. His body was working at an unnatural speed to repair his wounds and get him back to peak condition. The consequences of this rapid healing were nearly as bad as the wounds themselves. He faced sudden body temperature swings, bouts of extreme thirst, piercing headaches, and exhaustion that saw him sleeping days away. Krylus cared for him at every turn, but his concern was less about his condition and more about the creatures of the Aspia Stretch. If they found him in this state, he would be unable to fight them, and he worried that Cryolus would not do the sensible thing and flee for her own life. Fortunately, the time passed without incident, and Ulrin's strength returned. During his last few days of convalescence, he took to practicing his sword stances with Silverlight. The sword had lived up to its reputation as a weapon, slicing through the hides of the corrupted with all the ease of cutting air. But whilst that was clearly ideal, it did leave him in a bit of an awkward spot when it came to his follow-through. Typically, he would expect some resistance when striking something, and the instinct to follow through to drive his blade deeper was ingrained. When fighting with Silverlight, this instinct would cause him to accidentally overextend, even stumble forward, as the blade didn't slow in the slightest as it cleaved through his enemies. He tried to imagine what Master Soldan would say about it, after chastising him about his reliance on a weapon that did all the work instead of focusing on his pure talent. He would tell Ulrin that there was no reason for a swordmaster to ever have his blade out of place or his feet out of position. Control the blade, or the blade will control you. Following the imagined advice, he practiced adjusted versions of his sword forms that would allow him to take advantage of the lower amount of striking force required to cut with Silverlight, as well as allow him to get the blade back into position faster after the strike. He wouldn't know its effectiveness for sure until he put it to the test. While he was making progress in his health and his swordsmanship, he felt he was getting nowhere in understanding the Blood Maiden who had saved him. Their conversations remained surface level when they could manage to talk at all. Whenever he tried to ask her more details about the temple or the life of the Blood Maidens, she would only repeat what she had said already, or suddenly get very quiet. She didn't seem to have much of a life outside of the temple either, so there wasn't much to talk about there. And Ulrin wasn't helping matters. Since he decided to hide his identity, whenever he was asked about himself, he could only give vague responses to the role of Maxwell. He considered whether he should just come clean, but he was worried that revealing himself as a liar would break what little trust they had in each other. So, although he now spent more time with Cryolus than any other living person in years, he still knew very little about her. He'd have to trust his initial impressions. It finally came time for the excursion to the temple. It was daylight, for a change. Though thick black clouds blocked most of the sunshine, it was just bright enough that Ulrin could see without the use of a lantern, but not enough to impede the corrupted. It was likely the best they would get for a long while. As they gathered up what remained of their supplies, Ulrin again offered Cryolus the chance to back down from this mission. "I cannot guarantee your safety when there are that many corrupted about," he reminded her. "There's a chance neither of us will make it past the bridge." "I know. I'm not frail." If she was a liar, she was a good one. With enough supplies packed to last them a few days, the two began their journey back up the Lucent Run towards the temple. They were within a stone's throw of the bridge when they spotted the first body. The blind, by the looks of it, though with its head pulverized, it was hard to tell. The corpses of further corrupted littered the ground before the bridge along the bank of the river. As the top of the bridge came into view, they saw that it, too, was covered in severed claws, twisted limbs, and split torsos. Some Ulrin could identify as belonging to crawlers. Others matched mutations experienced by dancers or liars. And then there were some that looked like nothing Ulrin had yet seen. Terrifying hooks the size of Ulrin's body, and fleshy spikes that reminded him of thorn bushes. Whatever they had been brutalized the same way.
"What happened here?"
Cryolus whispered. She looked to Ulrin.
"Did you?"
"I wish I could take the credit. I only managed to kill a few before I took my unfortunate dip. And this is a far larger horde than I'd seen. Had I tried to cross against these odds, well, I would definitely be dead."
"Then what could have?"
She held a hand against her chest.
"We shouldn't do this. If whatever killed those creatures finds us, we'll stand no chance."
"No reason to come all this way and turn around, especially not when the path has been so kindly cleared for us. Besides, we don't know if it's even still here. It could be anywhere right now. Besides, he thought, there's nowhere else for me to go." He just hoped that, wherever it was, Silverlight was up to the challenge. Ignoring Krylus's further objections, Ulrin made his way up the stairs and onto the bridge. She hesitated, but eventually followed suit. Even cleared of creatures, the maiden's path was still treacherous, and the addition of the corpses and limbs strewn about added a layer of complexity to the careful movements needed to cross the sludge. He'd have to be careful when moving the bodies out of the way to keep their ichor from getting on him. Thanks to Krylus, his cloak and gambeson had been patched and should offer him a degree of protection, but if he got some on his gloves and accidentally touched his face, that was the end.
It's terrible, Krylus whispered behind him. They've been mutilated. Even the corrupted deserved better.
Respectfully, I disagree, he responded, gently kicking a severed leg out of his path and off the bridge. As far as I'm concerned, I'd shed no tears if every last corrupted in Lorne suffered the same fate.
They were human once, remember that. Would you think the same if these creatures were your former friends, family, or loved ones?
Her tone was so somber that it gave Ulrin pause and made him question his stance for a moment. But only for a moment. Once they turn, they're no longer that person. They're just a monster that needs to be destroyed. He did not add that the whole point of everything he was doing was killing the creature that had been his father. Thinking about his father made him question if this slaughter could have been done by one of the blooded. They had become creatures far greater and more terrifying than any of the other corrupted. Something like Vengris could have easily have done this. Yet, Ulrin had never seen a case of two corrupted fighting each other. Sometimes, in the heat of the hunt, they would slay each other to be the first to their prey in a mad frenzy of claws and fangs, but even if they were chasing someone across the bridge, it couldn't explain this carnage. Could it be an ally? Perhaps someone who had learned the secrets left by the matrons and turned them into a way to devastate the corrupted. He knew not to get his hopes up, but it was better than imagining the alternative.
We can still turn back,
Krylus whimpered.
It's not too late.
You can turn back if you want. She followed him as they reached the other end of the bridge and descended the stairs onto the islet. Ulrin got his first look at the islet and the Temple of the Blood Maidens. The temple covered most of the land here, leaving only a trail of stones from the bridge to the entrance, and a shelf of jagged rocks between it and the coursing river. It was a squat two-story structure full of bizarre triangular geometry. Triangular landing above the doorway, triangular windows along the second floor, and triangular roof gables that competed for height with the triangular spires. An old stone foundation was overlaid with wood, dyed crimson red, and then corroded by the river spray, only to be patched with more of the same. It somehow seemed simultaneously dilapidated and imposing. The front entrance was open, and the corpses of even more creatures lined the entryway. A trail of ichor ran into the temple beyond. Whatever had committed this slaughter, it had passed through here. Krylus grabbed Ulrin's arm as he was about to go in. She was shaking.
It's in there. I can sense it. It's different. Powerful, intense. Like the crimson rain given a single body. The corruption courses through it, yet there's something else. Another presence I can't make sense of within it. And there's this smell to its blood. Like flame and sulfur.
How far inside?
The main hall. It is just lingering there. We need to hide. Wait for whatever this is to pass. When it leaves, we can search the temple.
Logically speaking, he knew Krylus was likely right. But Ulrin was not thinking with logic at that moment. Hearing flame and sulfur made him think of his father, the charred corpses of his younger siblings, and his castle aflame. That stretch was permanently ingrained in his mind. Had Vengris left the ruins of the royal castle and taken to hunting his former subjects as corrupted? Or was there something else besides him that possessed that power? Either way, he was itching for a confrontation with it. Now was his chance. He pulled his arm free from Krylus. You wait here. Without waiting for a response, he stepped through the threshold into the temple, drawing Silverlight as he went. He had to trust that his sword lived up to its legend when it mattered the most. The temple's main hall reminded Ulrin of the dining hall in the royal castle. It was an oval room with a vaulted ceiling dominated by a long table in the center. Arched passageways beyond the table led deeper into the temple. Along the wall between these arches was elaborately calligraphed writing in a language that Ulrin couldn't read but recognized from his studies. Draconic. But all of that was an afterthought for Ulrin as his attention was drawn to the man seated at the end of the table. He brushed his long, white, blonde hair out of his red eyes as he turned the page on the text he had opened in front of him. Several candles were lit in front of him, and their flickering light cast an eerie reflection upon his pallid face. He had become thinner, paler. His eyes had grown narrower and his lips thinner, but there was still no questioning this man's identity.
Caravan!
Ulrin's older brother, the eldest son of King Vangris, the heir to the throne of Lorne, looked up from the text and met his eyes. Ulrin. Ulrin was so overwhelmed with emotions and questions that he struggled to form a coherent thought, and he spoke in a jumbled mess.
How are you? I thought you were... You're blooded. You should be... how long have you been... Where have you been?
Gervin's eyes were cold. I do not know why you're grinning so. If you're expecting a warm-hearted family reunion, you'll find none here. I will not tolerate you interrupting my research with your inane chatter.
What? Chatter?
Ulrin realized that he had been smiling, beaming, really, at the joy of his brother alive, unmutated and seemingly in control of his own mind. But the smile faded quickly at Gervin's tone.
How can you say that? It's been 5 years, Gervin. Are you not happy to see me?
His brother was expressionless. Would it matter if I was? If I rushed to embrace you with familial affection, would it end the blight of corruption? Would Lorne be restored, the people returned, and the world set to rights? Or would it accomplish nothing but a fleeting moment of familiarity? Ulrin could not believe what he was hearing.
You can't possibly mean that. After losing our family, our home, everything, living in this twisted shadow of what was once our kingdom for 5 grueling years, you don't care to see me? To see that I'm alive, that we found each other?
Perhaps if I thought you had some use, some talent to exploit, but as I remember, your skill set was quite limited, and I doubt you've committed yourself to studying since. Right now, you're little more than a nuisance, distracting me from my work. Gervin turned his attention back to the text, and away from his dumbfounded brother. As Ulrin stood there, reeling from the whiplash of emotional extremes, a hand on the back of his shoulder caused him to stop. Krylas's hand trembled, and she gripped him for support.
Be careful. That is who I was sensing. He may look normal, but all that power, the corruption, it's coming from him. He's what slaughtered all those creatures outside, I'm sure of it.
Ulrin tightened his grip on Silverlight. Is this true, Gervin? Are you corrupted? His brother did not bother to look up at him. I do not understand your surprise. All of the blood has been turned by the corruption, and all of the blooded turned with it. I am no exception.
But you look normal,
Ulrin argued as his desperation to deny the truth rose.
And you clearly still have your mind. How else would you be able to understand me?
You think the corrupted lack understanding, Ulrin? Gervin shook his head and closed the text. No. It is you who does not understand. Who they are, who they were, remains. Their memories, their hopes and dreams, their knowledge of language, all of it. It is merely buried, deprioritized in favor of stronger emotions and desires. The need to hunt, to kill, to satisfy a primal rage. They understand every word spoken to them, every plea for mercy, every cry for help. and they choose to ignore it in favor of fulfilling their true nature. It's admirable, in a way, their single-minded dedication, even if they lack the willpower to keep themselves from becoming beasts. Ulrun did not know how to respond. Should he be happy that his brother is still in his senses? Should he be terrified because he was facing a powerful corrupted capable of logical thought and tactics? Was it really still Garavan, or just a monster that had his face? Krylus, despite her obvious terror, dared to step beside Ulrun to confront the corrupted prince.
Are you trying to claim you have been able to hold on to your humanity simply because you have more willpower?
Garavan held his hand out in front of him, a gesture that indicated that it should be obvious. I am their better. That was true before the bleeding and has only become more apparent since. She pointed a finger at him, then traced that finger in a triangular pattern through the air as her eyes narrowed in concentration.
No,
she said as she recoiled, as if her finger had been burned.
No, you're lying. There's something else that set you apart. I can sense it.
Oh? Garavan leaned forward over the table. You're a true blood maiden. Here I took you for some opportunistic scavenger who looked across that distinctive robe and used it to fool my far too trusting brother. It is interesting that any of you remain. Was this but a few years prior, you might have been some use to me. Unfortunately, I think that time has passed. You're now little more than a relic of a different world. Ulrun had heard enough. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly no longer his brother. Garavan would never act like this. But fighting it was also not likely a good idea. Clearly, Garavan had grown incredibly powerful. Even a blooded shouldn't have been able to tear apart corrupted like that. And Garavan didn't even look wounded or tired from the effort. It would be best if they could just get out of there without a confrontation. Fine. It's clear you have no desire for a reunion, Ulrun said. I'll let you get back to your work. My associate and I will go upstairs. Garavan rose from his seat. Upstairs? Why, Ulrun, you wouldn't be heading to the chambers of the matrons, would you? Don't tell me you came all this way looking for this. He picked up the text from the table and held it up for Ulrun to see. It was a simple leather-bound tome with triangular patterns stitched into the cover using crimson thread.
The Crimson Journal, Krylus said. That was meant for the eyes of the matrons only. You should not have that.
Garavan shrugged. If they had any objections to me reading it, they've been quiet on the matter. In fact, the whole temple has been welcomingly silent since my arrival. Does that journal have what we're looking for? Ulrun asked. Krylus's eyes went wide in realization.
It contains the secrets of the Draken blood, added to and passed down by each generation of matrons. If their research led to any answers, they would have recorded it in there.
So I was right, Garavan replied. You came seeking the secrets of the blood. I doubt just for your education. You've never been one to seek knowledge just for knowledge's sake. No, you're hoping to find some secret you can use to fight the corrupted. Ulrun couldn't help but bristle at his brother's tone. Is that so wrong? To want to fight back against the shit state the kingdom is in? I think you, of all people, would understand. Ah, yes, the duty of the royal family. I remember it well. The pressure, the anxiety, the expectation that your entire life would be dedicated to the good of the kingdom. I do not miss it. I'm beyond such trivial obligations now. Only caution kept Ulrun from rushing toward this impostor to stab it with silverlight. How dare it speak such irreverence whilst wearing Garavan's face? But he knew if he did that, he would die. This creature showed no concern for his former brother, and likely wouldn't hesitate to tear him apart like the corrupted outside. Garavan turned the journal over in his hand. Tell me, brother, if you did find what you were looking for, what would you do with it? What is your goal? Ulrun squeezed the hilt of his sword. I will return to the castle, and I will slay the creature that was once our father, His former brother tilted his head curiously.
Unfortunate.
If your goal was slightly more realistic, I might have been tempted to give this to you. But if you intend to waste your life chasing an impossibility... He held the journal over one of the candles and set the pages aflame, ignoring cries of protest from both Ulrin and Cryolus. Once the pages were caught afire, he tossed the journal away. Ulrin rushed to the burning book and beat the flames with his cloak to extinguish them, but it was too late. From the ash leaking out from between the covers, it was clear the pages were beyond the point of salvage.
There was nothing there that could have aided you anyway, Garvin said. The matrons were on the right course, but had yet to draw the right conclusions. Following their notes would have just led you to your demise.
Staring at the remains of the journal, the information that he had travelled so far for, nearly died for, now reduced to smouldering ash, Ulrin snapped.
You bastard! How dare you!
His body moved faster than his mind. Somewhere he was aware of Cryolus shouting at him to stop, but his rage had no control. He rushed at Garvin, Silverlight poised to stab him in the throat. Like the strike of a cobra, Garvin reached out and grabbed Ulrin's wrist, stopping the blade mere inches from its target. His grip was like a vice, and his strength was far beyond anything Ulrin could hope to match. Though he was so close, he could not force his arm forward even 1 inch.
How foolish, Garvin taunted. However have you survived this long with such poor impulses? Perhaps I can spare just enough time to teach my foolish younger brother a lesson.
There was a crack as Garvin squeezed down on Ulrin's wrist, breaking it. Ulrin screamed out in agony and was forced to drop the sword. Then came a force like being struck square on by a battering ram as Garvin shoved Ulrin with an open palm. The impact against Ulrin's chest caused the wind to be knocked out of him, and he was powerless to do anything as his body was sent flying backward across the room. He finally hit the back wall and felt the wood shatter from the impact. Fortunately, the wood was old and soggy and gave way easily, softening the impact somewhat. But he still hit it with enough force to knock him completely senseless. When his wits returned, he realized he was on the ground. Cryolus was standing over him protectively, putting herself between him and the creature. It reminded him of a mother cat protecting its young from hunters, knowing it was completely outmatched but standing in defiance nonetheless.
I didn't know you garnered such loyalty, Ulrin, Garvin goaded. Perhaps father was wrong about your lack of leadership qualities.
Ulrin tried to pick himself up from the floor, but accidentally put weight on his broken wrist, and the room momentarily went white with pain.
Now, if only we could do something about your impulsiveness, Garvin continued. He stepped over to where Silverlight now lay. Is this what is making you so imprudently bold? This is an artifact of our dynasty, is it not? What is it called? Ah, yes, Silverlight.
Ulrin watched in despair as Garvin picked up Silverlight, the one and only thing Ulrin had to show for 5 years of struggle. Now he threatened to take it, just as he had taken the only chance to use the works of the matrons.
An interesting weapon, Garvin said, holding the sword high. Glimmersteel supposedly has some fascinating properties. It's a shame I never had the opportunity to study it properly.
As he held the sword up, the silver stream that ran down the length of the blade seemed to pulse. At the tip of the blade, where the stream formed droplets that had never fallen, a droplet fell. The tiny bead of silver dripped from the blade and landed on the back of Garvin's hand. There was a sizzling sound akin to meat being held over an open flame, and Garvin recoiled, dropping the blade. Silverlight landed tip down, its blade sinking several inches into the stone floor before coming to a rest. Garvin held his injured hand in the other, a wisp of smoke rising from it.
A trap? No, Ulrin is not clever enough to set up something like that. Some inherent property of the Glimmersteel, then. Though not one I had ever read about.
Ulrin tried again, and this time succeeded in getting back to his feet. He gritted his teeth as he faced off with his former brother. The heir to the throne tisked and turned his back. I've wasted enough time. You're free to the dregs of this place if you wish it, though I doubt you will find much of value. I've cleared it of corrupted, though. If you want my brotherly advice, give up on your fool's errand of slaying Vangrus and remain here. The king is well beyond your reach, and nothing you find here or anywhere else will make it any different. Be grateful you have been yet allowed to live, and do not further tempt fate. He walked toward the door and stopped just before stepping outside. Oh, in case something so obvious was lost on you, do not follow me. If you become an impediment to my work, I will kill you. With that, Garavin left the temple without so much as a glance behind at his brother. Ulrin was left hurt in every sense of that word, and with a mind full of troubling questions. But one stood out above all the others. What had his brother become?
Thank you for listening to this preview of Drakenblood, the Malformed King. To enjoy the rest of the novel right now, sign up for EerieCast Plus for less than $3 a month. Just go to eeriecast.com/plus. Your membership will give you access to the audiobook of Drakenblood, as well as the ebook. You'll even get ad-free access to all EerieCast shows, a 20% discount for all EerieCast store products, and more. Otherwise, you can pre-order the ebook via the Amazon link in the description, or wait for the physical release this October. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com.